You're live.
This is Senate Transportation. Welcome, Senator Harrison. We were waiting for you.
Sorry about that. It took longer to connect. Thank you.
Well, we're glad you're here. And we want to thank everyone for coming today. The hope is, and I'll speak for myself, as chair of the committee, my hope is that what we can do is lay out the issues in a number of areas that transportation is facing. I think we all know that nationally, there was an NCSL meeting in Burlington very recently this month, and a number of us were at that. And states across the country are all facing the same issues around revenue, the increased costs, and all sorts of pressures that are putting pressure on their transportation budgets. Our hope is today that we can lay out some of those as kind of the groundwork for the session that we're coming upon, and help frame the picture of what we're all looking for. And so we have a fairly full morning, and I'd like to open it and offer the secretary a chance to say a few words, and then we're going to move to Jeremy Reed, who is the chief engineer, and then we'll go into some of the revenue estimates after that. And we've got our neighboring state to speak. We've got some people that will come from some national organizations to talk about that. And then we'll dive into some particular areas, the towns, public transit, of where they are, to set the stage for what we're going to be facing and what will be, I think, the central issue in this committee come this winter. And we welcome you here. Thank you for coming, Secretary. And if you can give your name and kick us off, we love that.
Thank you very much, Chair Westman. For the record, my name is Joe Flynn. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Transportation. With me in the room today, to my left is Jeremy Reed, Chief Engineer of the agency. Seated in the back is Michelle Boomhauer, the Director of Policy Planning and Intermodal Development and the agency's legislative liaison. And to my right, Candace Elmquist, who is the Chief Financial Officer of the agency. Appreciate the opportunity to come in. I think you teed this up quite accurately, Chair Westman. We began this conversation collectively. You really, I think, delved into this deeply last year, and this is a continuance of it. And, you know, obviously in late January, we will present a balanced budget, but we agree that there are significant pressures that continue to face the agency, and there will be for the foreseeable future. I would note that while it does not provide us any relief as we look to the 27 budget or the 28 budget and thereafter, it's a documented fact, at least back into the 1980s, that Vermont has seen pressure on the transportation budget. That's out there. There are studies on that. The agency always puts together an appropriate budget, but I do believe that there is the confluence of a few circumstances in this moment that raise the awareness of sustainability, and those really have to do with costs that we're seeing. I know that Chief Engineer Reed will speak more about that, but across the nation, as you said, Chair Westman, and in this region and in our state, we are seeing higher and higher and higher prices, and for justifiable reasons. Everything's gone up in the cost stream, and so with that, the investment dollars that we have, both primarily through the federal government, that then require match money from us, don't go as far as they need to. I always say this in testimony, and I will say this again today with my friends from paving in the room. We acknowledge that we need to do more miles. The issue here is how do we slice the pie with the finite number of dollars that we have to work with. For anybody listening to this testimony who is not aware, the agency, and I know the committee is, but I just want to frame this, the agency goes into every budget year knowing exactly how many federal dollars it will get. And it knows how much state match money it needs to have to draw down all of those federal dollars. But so with that, you have a finite amount of money in your total budget. And then one of our many responsibilities is how do we address the totality of Vermont's infrastructure and the totality of Vermont's modality, meaning transit, rail, air, highway. And how do we do that in a fashion that is balanced in the best data-driven way we believe that we can put forward? And I emphasize we believe because I think that's often where the healthy debate comes from. And that's why we're here. We acknowledge that. So we acknowledge there's funding pressure. I think we all know there's infrastructure condition pressure, and we welcome the opportunity. And again, I think too, it's important to say we clearly acknowledge the pressure Vermont towns are in. We do not sit here as a monolith tone deaf to towns. Every single one of us who work at the agency, every single one of us in this room live in a town. I was on my select board in South Hero. I know what the towns are facing. We've dealt closely with towns, especially in the wake of 2023 and 2024. First person dealt with towns myself, and I appreciate, and I do believe that is an area that continues to be a concern, and I do believe that it's more than just funding from the agency, which of course we'll talk about and continue to talk about. But I do believe that we need to rethink too how towns perhaps come together to work on projects they need to do, perhaps collectively, to have greater buying power, because there's just so much money that can be raised, whether it's at the local level or at the state level or at the federal level. So I welcome the conversation, appreciate the sincere interest of the committee meeting with us early, and thank you for the opportunity to open.
Thank you very much, Secretary. And now we're going to move to Jeremy, and you've been in this committee and talked about the needs out there and the pressures both in the increasing costs and particularly in the increasing cost side. And if you can kick us off.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So for the record, Jeremy Mead, Chief Engineer, Vermont Agency Transportation. Just wanting to provide a bit of an update on where we are from the cost pressure side, as the Chair alluded to. And then I've got some slides discussing what we have for models or conditions moving forward at current funding levels. Oh, that's it. So as a primer and refresher, we're going to be talking a lot about the condition of the network. These are just some pictures showing what we consider good, fair, poor, and very poor road conditions. Obviously, the upper left is basically a pristine road. The upper right has some distressing, you can see with some minor cracking. The lower left obviously has more cracking, and that would be considered poor. And then the bottom right obviously looks as though anybody would intuitively know that's a very poor condition roadway. Also, as the Chair said, we wanted to talk about the cost of construction. So this is the latest information from Federal Highway Administration, and it shows what is called the National Highway Construction Cost Index. So that's a composite number based on all the inputs for construction. And that really illustrates our buying power as it relates to our projects. We do see a little bit of a dip in the first quarter of 2025. Now, those were projected numbers. Quarters 3 and 4 of 24 are actuals. But you can certainly see from 2020, the third and fourth quarter of 2020, a significant spike in the cost of our projects. All for naught, the IIJA certainly helped mitigate that, but it was not a buying power windfall that we had originally hoped.
Can you just, what is it indexed to? So what is this number?
Yeah, so basically this has been being tracked going back to 2003. So if 2003 is 1.0 and current numbers are just over 3, effectively what this is showing is that it's 3 times more expensive to do a project in 2025 than it was in 2003. But with that, what we have here is a graph starting in 2025 showing what we are forecasting the pavement conditions to be based on FY's 26 paving program budget of $103 million. We see roughly 6% in the very poor category, 21 in the poor category, 30 in fair, and 43 in good. And we see a decline in condition out to 2035, where if the models hold true and the funding level stays the same, we could see 48% in.
Is there a inflation versus 103's flat?
So what this does is this negates inflation on the revenue and on the cost side. So this is strictly $2025. So assuming essentially equivalent buying power for the next 10 years.
Would be interesting to see in this, getting back to the issue that the secretary raised in his speech in miles. In a form where those of us that don't deal with this every day like you do, Jeremy, what does this mean in overall miles?
Right. So the number of miles is largely dependent on the type of treatment. And we've talked about various roads have different needs. And so we can take a road that's in good or fair condition and do a preservation treatment on it. And again, there's some fluidity for these numbers, but let's just say that's roughly $300,000 to $500,000 a mile. On the other end of the spectrum, if something's in very poor condition, it doesn't make sense to do a thin treatment because that has a very low lifespan. So if we were to do our most intensive treatment, which is a sub-base reclaim and new pavement overlay, that's about $1 million a mile. So again, the makeup of the paving program of that $103 million certainly alters the total miles. That being said, as the condition deteriorates across the network, some of those cheaper treatments are no longer viable options, and we are being forced into a more expensive treatment.
Go ahead.
I just want to make sure I understand, because I think we've seen this basic style. Oh, you went one, but I guess it kind of holds true for the bridges as well. But we've seen this a few times in different, at least I have over the last 8 years. And I guess I'm just trying to understand correctly. So with our current annual investment, basically in the next 10 years, we will see just about half of all of our roads in very poor condition.
That is what the modeling is indicating.
Yeah, and that's state roads exclusively.
Correct.
Okay, so I think when we think about town roads, one of the things that we talked extensively about this last year was we don't get this for town roads. There's no nice, what is the rate of what the road conditions are declining.
Correct.
But I think we all anecdotally experience that it seems like it's getting bad on our local roads. So if you could take this and kind of think about what you've seen for towns, are we at a greater amount by 2035? Like over 50% of our roads will be in poor condition for those local roads would be your expectation? Or are you like, where do you see this condition compared to what the municipalities will experience? Because that's bad to me.
Right. Totally understand the motivation for the question, Senator, but I honestly don't have any information beyond sort of the towns I drive in. So projecting where the town infrastructure is based on the information I have available would just, it'd be a foolhardy exercise. And, that being said, as you may remember, there was language in last year's transportation bill to look at that very thing. So that will be ready in the spring of 27. And again, I don't know how much information we'll be able to collect, but I think we're going to try to take a sample and project that across the state to at least give us an order of magnitude of what the conditions are, what the needs are. But that project's just kicking off, and so I don't really have any more information on that.
Thank you.
If I might just add to that, I think it's reasonable to presume that, I mean, we know the towns are facing the same issues we are.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to assume that we're getting as good a price per ton in place as anybody. So if we still face these challenges, I think it's pretty accurate that we know the towns are facing the same challenges. The question is, in large part, in particular, to, as Jeremy said, we don't have the structure at this point to monitor it, but towns perhaps, depending on what road you're talking about, have a little bit more flexibility on the type of treatment. Because based on average daily traffic count and how the road is designed in the first place, it may not necessarily require that $1 million a mile treatment that he mentioned versus the other treatment. So a dollar might go further, but it's clear that every pressure we see, they see. I mean, we all see, but they're in the same business, just to a much smaller scale. So.
Well, thank you. That's helpful.
And the 103 million was chosen because that's the budget this year, or what?
That was FY26 of budget.
46. And then I think you presented this before. What is the amount of money that would keep the roads at a constant condition?
So the models don't necessarily, they're not structured that way, right? So the way the models are structured,
You can just keep adding different dollar amounts.
it would be a very iterative process, but because keeping it at the status isn't one of the inputs, right? It would be very iterative. The way the models work essentially is we say, optimize the program at $103 million, right? So it takes the network condition at 10 mile points and says, okay, we've got deterioration curves based on that type of road. How do I look at, the 3,300 times 10, all those little mile points? What is the best bang for the buck out of that 103 million? If I had to intuitively guess, right, I mean, we're probably talking 175 to 200 million, and that's a little bit speculative, but I think we've seen historically at somewhere in that neighborhood, we see pavement condition either stay the same or go down, and that's what I'm basing it on.
We've focused on dollars and not on miles. Go ahead.
Before we get going in the session, could you give us a sheet going back to 2003 to present time as to how many miles we paid
Miles, yes.
each year in dollars?
Yes, I believe we can. I don't think I have condition back that far.
No, that's fine.
But I believe we should be able to produce the dollars and miles paid.
Okay, that'd be great.
So switching gears a little bit to bridge condition, as I've previously stated, bridges are less reactive to funding changes because they deteriorate at a much lower pace. That being said, they also are much more expensive to bring back into good condition. So on both sides of the coin, they're less reactive. That's why we see, a much flatter deterioration with these graphs. But within the interstate bridge condition, we see roughly, 7% was in poor condition. And we basically predict that to be relatively flat out 10 years based on the current funding levels. And I would just also say that there is also a distribution within the program that ties in here, again, rehabilitation and preservation treatments at the right time instead of just letting it deteriorate. So, over time, we'll see essentially the same conversation unfold with bridges as we do with pavement about the cost of the treatments and things like that. So similar graph, but on the state system side, right? So that was interstate, and this is so for the state systems. Again, basically at 3% now, and basically staying flat, although it can came up a little bit to 7% in 2035. I will add and touch on this a little bit deeper in the next slide, but our state system is in really good condition. And one of the reasons for that, if we go back to Hurricane Irene, we've probably been able to replace ballpark about 100 bridges through ER funds that wouldn't otherwise have been done because they didn't require any formula money for that. It did require state match, but it didn't require our to use our traditional formula funds for it. We focus pretty much today on bridge and pavement just because that's where our models are most mature, and it's also what we have the most information on. We go out there at least once every other year and get conditions on these assets. So we feel more comfortable with these numbers, but I'm not touching on some of the other unmet needs like rock falls, deep interstate culverts, and then certainly smaller culverts as well. So this is a snapshot on two programs, not an all-inclusive prediction of where the state network will be. So just as the senator or chair alluded to at the beginning, this is a national issue, and I just wanted to present this slide as a comparison to where we are relative to other Northeast states. As you can see, interstate pavements are a little bit higher than others at 1.3% poor. Now, I want to clarify, these are our national reporting standards. And I think as I've touched on previously, Vermont has 4 categories. On the federal level, they have 3. So they have good, fair, poor. We also have a 4th category and very poor. So this 1.3 number doesn't translate to my previous slide on the poor condition. We've got a little bit more detailed grading system, but we do report federally to their standards. And then non-interstate pavements were about 7.6%, or again, a little bit higher than our counterparts elsewhere. As I alluded to, obviously our bridges are in very good condition relative to our neighbors. So there is some good news there as they're the most expensive asset and most difficult to bring back into good condition. Any questions for the committee?
What we don't cover in any of this, and those of us that went through the JTOC standards in the fall is we did put off some projects. And we also made some shaving within the maintenance area, which is mostly all state dollars. Just remind the committee if you could, what are some of the things we did that we will in this year's transportation budget have to deal with around that, and particularly in maintenance and worries, because that's 100% state mostly.
Correct. So I'll let Candace speak specifically to the plan we presented, the decision plan at JTOC. I'll just sort of high level speak to the consequence of some of that. And as I alluded to earlier, deferred maintenance does generally present itself in more expensive projects later on. And I think we all kind of intuitively know that, right? If you have a little bit of a feeling pain on your house, and then ultimately you defer that until the wood is rotten, that becomes a much more expensive repair than just painting the house in the first place. So I think that's an fairly intuitive notion that's recognized by all. And so without question, as we reduce maintenance activities across the network, it will yield itself to some level in increased project costs and more projects being necessary to maintain the network at existing conditions.
This is kind of a general question because I really, and this might be something the NCSL folks have a little bit more information on, but is this just a bubble? Like, is this increase for the construction costs in the industry? Are folks saying this is going to go down? And so this is just a big bubble of cost that we're going to get back to those previous levels? Or are folks saying, no, this trend is continuing up and we're not likely to see a decrease? Because it just makes me think a little bit like, dang, I wish we had done more in 2011, like,
Sure.
And so I'm like, are we going to say, ooh, we should have done less in 2025 and waited out 2028? Or are we going to say the same exact thing that we're saying about 20? And that's a
Right.
fortune teller, but.
So I would just sort of point to the graph, and, there is kind of a staircase trend where there's minor ups and downs, but in general, inflation never reverts over a 10 or 15-year period, right? Inflation just sort of keeps ratcheting up. Now, we do see in Q1 of 25 a slight decrease, but certainly over a 4 to 5 year period, it's never cheaper tomorrow than it is today.
And I think part of that as well, we were just at the Associated General Contractors annual meeting 2 weeks ago. Many members in the room there, including the incoming president in the room here. Congratulations. I think in large part, and I am no expert in this, but paving is a huge piece of our business. I think oil right now is like $56, $57 a barrel. An oil person would tell you they'd like it to be at $85 a barrel. It's I won't say relatively cheap is not the right word, but it's on the lower end of the cost model. And I'm not laying all these issues on oil or how that relates to asphalt. What I'm really saying is a large part of what we do is on the lower end of the cost model, if you will, as far as the raw material. So I don't think I've seen anything, whether I've read, watched, or heard, in meetings where industry is indicating the labor pressures are going to improve, indicating that, every company of any size provides insurance, healthcare, all the benefits that everyone in our own lives, have, and at the behest most often of our employer. Wage rates, housing. I mean, it's all connected. No, seriously, because every employee of these companies has to live someplace, whether they're paying rent or they're paying a mortgage, and they have to get to work. So my comments don't intend to be a diversion. I don't see the totality of all of that improving an awful lot, just because in my lifetime, I don't think I've ever seen tremendous drops in the cost of goods. So, will certain things shake out and perhaps level out? That may well be. But I think when you look at construction and you look at petroleum, regardless of whatever a posture is on the end use in relation to moving a vehicle down the road, petroleum is the lifeblood of a lot of construction, both asphalt and concrete and steel. You have to heat it. You have, there's, so I really don't see a tremendous downturn. There could certainly be some corrections, and there could be technological changes that make materials go further, which could have some benefit to pricing. That's just,
Okay.
I wouldn't take any of that to the bank.
Well,
That's my
thank you.
thoughts.
No, that's just helpful because I think as we try to envision a strategy, it would be a real, if you had all both said, oh no, it's gonna go down in 2 years, we have all these expectations, the cost will drop. I'd say, well, okay, maybe we can ride out this storm in a different way that we might think of, but that doesn't sound like what you're saying.
Well,
Yeah, and I would just say, if we look at this, the graph, right, if we go back to 2008, right, we see a bit of a spike, and that was the hour days, right? So there's a massive influx. So there is, kind of a basic supply and demand chart there. And then you do see the costs go down after that. But again, that was in the middle of a recession. So I think from our perspective, the costs will drop if the economy tanks, but so will our revenues.
right.
Yeah.
So
The deltas will be,
Yeah. I would just jump in and get back to the
Sorry.
labor piece in
Right.
this. When I look at that demographically, we're in an older region of the country and and the demographics aren't changing quickly here. So if we could hire 80-year-olds to work on a construction crew, but I don't think that's gonna happen. We might be able to find some crews, but
Right.
but it's hard to find 30, 40, 50-year-olds
Yeah.
and train them up because some of this work is technical
Yep.
and you can't just hire anybody off the street.
Right.
So,
and highly physical
yeah,
as well.
right. It's highly physical and we have an aging population, just like most of the states in our region.
Right.
So. Is there any last parting comments that either one of the two of you would like to?
I don't know.
Parting comments. Obviously we'll have a much more in-depth conversation after the 20th of January. My only parting comment might be to your last comment, Senator White. I don't necessarily see the agency in a financial life or death struggle in fiscal 28. I mean, will it be difficult? Sure, but we have an adaptability to pressure. The agency has had an adaptability to pressure forever. And it delivers, a responsible product for the money that it has to work with. But there will need to be some significant rethinking of the priorities of spending. And, I do believe that this conversation will feed into that. And so, again, just welcome it and thanks for focusing on that because it's just a commonly shared reality. Thanks.
Thank you both. Since you're here, Candace, and you're here, Logan, and we do have the secretary from our neighboring state on the screen. I was thinking that we might switch to
That's fine. I can stay. If you need me to, or I can go.
and I'm and maybe you can help me. Mr. Cass is not a secretary.
Commissioner.
Commissioner Cass.
Hi, Bill, it's Joe. That's just nomenclature because it's a bigger agency and New York calls it commissioner as well. And it is a much bigger agency. So it's simply how they title things.
Correct.
Well,
I think you're right, Joe. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to thank you for being on Zoom with us today. A lot of people say, well, what have we done wrong? But this is really an issue that almost every state in the country is facing. Costs and revenue issues that are somewhat driven by more efficient vehicles, electric vehicles, all sorts of things. And we know that our neighbors are having the same problems that we are. And I would put it in the category of we all like company. So if you could help us understand what's going on in New Hampshire, and we've got both NCSL and AASHTO coming after you to speak. So this is to try to create a picture that and help us understand what's going on in your state.
Sure, certainly. Thank you for having me, Senator. I'm going to pull up some slides here in a second. I would just echo or confirm a lot of what I heard Jeremy and Secretary Flynn talking about. Very similar issues with inflation in New Hampshire and our construction industry that we're dealing with as well too. So I would just echo a lot of what they said. I don't want to be redundant, but I did want to just throw that in there.
A little bit of redundancy isn't bad, because sometimes it takes a few of us a few times to hear something before it sinks in.
Yeah. So I'm going to just step through a few things about New Hampshire's budget, some of the issues that we're dealing with our highway fund. We're just coming off of a public process. Every 2 years, we update our capital program, our 10-year plan. And we have some austere priority decisions through that. So I'll summarize a little of that if I can share my screen. Hopefully you're seeing that.
Yes.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
So just for, so that's a picture of the Hinsdale-Brattleboro Bridge under construction there. I think we have a very good working relationship with our partners in Vermont as well there too. There we go. So the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, our mission is serving, connecting through transportation, and our vision is a safe, reliable, connected, multimodal transportation system effectively managed by a dedicated and skilled workforce. A little bit of overview just for comparison to Vermont. So our organizational structure, we have 5 divisions. I'm the commissioner. I have an assistant commissioner, a chief engineer that kind of oversees all of project development and operations. And then we have a deputy commissioner that oversees the finance, administration, policy, as well as the non-highway transportation assets, aeronautics, rail, and transit. We also have attached to our executive office, our asset management performance group does a lot of the modeling that I heard Jeremy speaking about, as well as our safety section is a direct report to the commissioner's office. So, so that we have cross-divisional safety applications. Just again, for some comparison, I should know, I'm not 100% sure the size of Vermont Agency of Transportation, but we have about 16, that's a little bit dated, that slide. In the last budget process, we gave up about 9 positions. So we have about 1,640 positions. Currently, we're working with about a 20 to 25% vacancy rate. So while we have about 1,640 full-time budgeted positions, it's, you know, we're dealing day-to-day operations with substantially less than that. We have 2,160 state bridges, 1,698 municipal bridges. What we call red list, you all probably talk about is structurally deficient. That's kind of our metric that we've worked with and been driving down the number of structurally deficient bridges, the state red list, as well as the municipal red list. In general size of the maintenance responsibilities, we maintain about 4,600 centerline miles. There are an additional 300 miles of state roads that municipalities maintain. I heard a question about local roads and condition of local roads. Very similar. We don't have eyes necessarily on that. But overall, in New Hampshire, the total roadway miles is about 16,000. So my agency, we maintain the state roads make up about 30% of all the roadway miles in New Hampshire. You know, our annual paving goal is to try to do about 500 centerline miles per year to just keep up with general maintenance and keep up with, you know, keeping the roads in serviceable condition. That's about a once every 10-year resurfacing cycle, as well as some other facts and figures on the size and magnitude. So I just put that out there for general comparison of you know, how we maybe compare numbers wise and scope of responsibility to Vermont Agency of Transportation. This is a makeup of our next biennial budget. So we budget every 2 years. We just came off last legislative session updating the biannual budget for FY 26 and 27. Our total budget is roughly about $800 million per year, per annum, annually. And it's made up of 4 real primary funding sources. We have a turnpike system in New Hampshire. I'll cover a little bit more on that. That's about 18% of our overall budget. The highway fund, that is the state highway fund generated by the state gas tax or road toll, and primarily that and motor vehicle fees. From our budget, that makes up about 31%. Other funds are typically dedicated gas tax revenue, so that's not the unrestricted revenue, but that's portions of the gas tax are dedicated for specific uses. They're categorized as other. And the federal funds that we put in our program make up about 38%. We have a very, very small draw in our aeronautics, rail, and transit division on the general fund. Makes up about 0.3% of our budget, about $1.8 million. So a lot of our budget issues in the state are around tend to be around the general fund, and we, at least DOT, tend to be a little bit outside the fray of some of the general fund challenges. In general, when we talk about our budget, we usually try to talk about it in 2 main components. So the operating side of the budget, which is about 46% of our overall budget, that's the men and women that plow the roads and maintain the system and all the materials and everything that we need to keep up the system. Primarily, that is the focus when we do our biannual budget with the legislature. It's usually focused on the operational side of the budget. The other side of the budget is a lot of our federal aid, a lot of those programs, a lot of the construction program, municipal aid and construction. Those are, kind of flow through dollars that go out to those programs. We typically take those type of spending priorities up, as I alluded to, when we update the 10-year plan. So we've got it structured that, usually 1 year of the legislative session, we're dealing with our operating budget. The next year of our legislation, we're primarily focused on the biennial update of the 10-year plan. That's what we've been working on this past fall, and we'll be going to the legislature this winter. And that's really where the debates about prioritization of spending on construction and transportation infrastructure take place. And the percentages of funding and stuff are there. But by and large, the municipal aid and construction side of the budget is primarily federally funded. The operating side of our budget is primarily the highway fund. So this slide just has a little bit more definition about those primary sources of funding, federal funds that we receive from federal agencies, primarily for those programs. The FHWA funds for our surface transportation programs, FTA for transit administration, FAA funds for our aeronautic and eligible airport facilities. The highway funds, the state highway funds, they're our primary revenue source for operations and maintenance of our transportation system. We give block grant aid to cities and towns. Statutorily, it's about 12% of our gas tax and motor vehicle revenue goes to cities and towns for aid. We put funds into a state aid bridge program, as well as general obligational debt service that comes from our facilities capital infrastructure. And again, this is generated primarily through the gas tax and vehicle registration fees. We have the use of these funds are constitutionally restricted to strictly surface transportation. We do have a turnpike system. The toll plazas, that's an enterprise system. So the toll revenue that supports the turnpike system can only be used on the turnpike system. Again, it's restricted by RSA that it can only be used to maintain the turnpike system. So we can't draw turnpike funds to support other parts of the agency or other parts of our responsibility. As I said, general funds are a very small portion of our budget. And the other aspect is capital funds. We do have a state capital budget, which primarily, goes towards, when we reconstruct our facilities, our patrol sheds, our office buildings and things like that. And I presume that's fairly similar in Vermont. So a very quick overview of New Hampshire's highway fund. We talk a lot with our legislature with highway fund in the name and tend to look to the DOT, but we are quick to point out that the highway fund is not the DOT and the DOT is not the highway fund. In New Hampshire, the gas tax revenue and stuff is collected by the Department of Safety. So the revenue projections and things like that do not come from the DOT. They come from the Department of Safety, who are the collection arm of that aspect. And while gas tax, road toll in highway fund is restricted constitutionally to just surface transportation, the revenue from the highway fund is appropriated to various agencies, including the DOT and our Department of Safety. Department of Justice does have some small percentage of that to support their activities, primarily their activities that are in support of our agency. So in 2024, for example, of the overall highway fund revenue, about 57% came to DOT for our operational activities, 30% to other agencies, primarily the Department of Safety. And the biggest part of that is the enhancement, our state police and things like that, the enhancement, the enforcement of roadway laws and so forth. And about 13% has gone to municipalities. And this has been not an issue. I say I get a lot of questions from legislators and others that have opinions that highway fund dollars should all go to keeping up the roads and bridges. And we're quick to point out that it's not our decision. The legislature appropriates funds. They've made the determination that Department of Safety and state police and others are appropriate uses of the highway fund. And at the end of the day, if you took money from the Department of Safety or state police and prioritize that for DOT, you still have that hole that needs to be funded somehow. So it is a complicated, it can be a complicated issue. But as I said, highway funds are our primary source of funding for the general operations. And in general, when we look at the highway fund, as we went through the last budget and as we're going through our 10-year plan, revenue is flat. It's been flat since we've come out of COVID. So for the last 4 years, it's been the actual receipts have been very flat, and the projected revenue is very flat, and in the long term, incrementally declining about 0.5% a year, primarily due to increased fuel efficiency of vehicles and such. I've talked about this, but just I guess for context, our highway fund, we have had debates every 2 years about how to balance the budget, and our legislature and our approach has been, it seems like every 2 years there are one-time fixes to shore up the highway fund and balance the budget. And this is going back for as long as I can remember, at least the last 10 or 15 years. It started with, a number of years ago, around 2010, 2012 budget, if I remember, where we stopped funding a hard match with highway funds to our federal program. And we rely on a credit that we get for investing state dollars, for investing turnpike dollars into, public roadways and into interstate commerce roadways, our turnpike system. So at the end of the day, we put very little state funds into our roadway construction, and we're reliant pretty much solely on the on our federal apportionment and what we receive as part of our federal aid for our highway and construction program. We've had a lot of general fund infusions to shore up the highway fund. We've done registration fee surcharges. At one point, we sold the turnpike system, or the highway system sold a bridge to the turnpike system for like $150 million. It was kind of a gimmicky way of getting about $150 million from the turnpike system into the highway fund, again, to balance the budget that way. In this last budget, the legislature had raised motor vehicle registration fees to balance the budget. The House had a larger increase when it got to the state Senate. They cut it in half, which basically balanced it through the biennium. So I fully expect in next summer, next fall, when we take up the budget, we're going to have same discussions about how to balance the highway fund. I had mentioned our 10-year plan. That's what we've been working on. That's our capital program for our highway and bridge construction program. Again, revenue is relatively flat, lower than previous projections. Project and operating costs are going up. We're dealing with the escalation and inflation, very similar to what Jeremy had pointed out. The costs are exceeding revenue. We've had some state revenue that we've been utilizing for the last 9 or 10 years. It was part of a TIFIA financing program to accomplish a major reconstruction project of Interstate 93 from the state line in Salem up to Manchester. We were able to defer paying principal for a number of years, and that debt service just kicked in this fiscal year. So it's about $20 million a year of state funds that were going to rural roads and bridges that aren't available anymore. That's another impact of this 10-year plan. We're looking at scaling back our program with a reduction in the number of projects and not adding any new projects in the next 2-year rollout of the 10-year plan. But our focus has been on, first and foremost, on maintenance and preservation. So as we set those preservations, we need to keep up with the pavement conditions. We need to keep up with addressing the structurally deficient and redless bridges. And our focus has been on continuing to invest in our core system programs and build on some of those successes. Maintaining our core mission objectives. It's roughly about $150 million a year of the generally about $225 to $240 million of federal aid that we get each year that goes primarily to those core system programs. Jeremy hit some of this, but this is a slide that we've taken through our presentation in terms of the impacts of inflation, of cost increases, of some other project delays, of that state revenue that's no longer available as it's going to pay the TIFIA debt service. At the upshot, what we're looking at for this 10-year plan is reducing or cutting about $400 million worth of projects, not adding any new ones, and cutting about $400 million of projects. Essentially, as I've described it, we have, revenue is flat, costs are up, and essentially what has to give is those projects. And as I said, we've been focusing on our core priorities, paving and redless bridges and keeping up with the maintenance of the existing system. So a lot of the individual projects, these are the roadway reconstruction, these are the complete street projects, these are the multi-use paths, some of the other municipally sponsored project priorities that tend to be the ones that we have focused on for project reductions. So we have in our program about 88 individual projects, $684 million, and we're looking at either removing or delaying about 49 of those projects, as well as suspending any added new projects in the new year. So numbers wise, and at a kind of a very high level summary, that's the kind of impact of the inflationary and escalation impact that we've seen on our program. And lastly, just because it has been a point of discussion in the last several months, is our turnpike system. So that's a quick graphic what describes the turnpike system, but it's essentially the F.E. Everett Turnpike, Route 3, and then 293 and 93 from Nashua up to Concord. It's the Central Turnpike, I-95 between Hampton and Portsmouth, and the Spalding Turnpike on the eastern side of the state. And again, that's an enterprise system. The toll plazas there and the toll revenue from those toll plazas go to support that system, and it's isolated from the rest of our budget and our program. But very similar to the highway fund side of things, costs are up, revenues are flat, and we have a couple of major capital projects that we are coming to the realization this update of the 10-year plan that there is just not the revenue there to support those capital projects. So we've had a fairly healthy, a fairly robust discussion this past fall about what it would take to fund those projects. We had floated the idea of a toll increase, about $1 increase at all of the major toll plazas that would support the construction of those projects. We have some of the history that we haven't raised the tolls since 2007, and we've removed other tolls and impacted our revenue by the removal of those tolls as rationale toward supporting a toll increase. As we got toward the end of the process, our governor had stepped in and did not support a toll increase. So right now, we're not moving forward with it. I do foresee that it will continue to be a discussion as we got to the legislature this time. A couple of those major projects, the support was there. Even our executive counselors and some of the folks have confirmed the need. These are important projects for safety, for economic development, and things like that. But couldn't get to the point of saying they supported the toll increase to fund them. So, and that's all the slides I have. Hopefully I can take any questions anyone has, but I hopefully gave you a general overview of where we're at in answering.
I'm gonna first thank you. It makes me smile a little bit how much like us it sounds. And I want to start off with first, you did a really good job with the first picture because Senator Harrison is from Windham County, and any bridge that goes from Brattleboro to Hinsdale, I think she's very interested in.
Oh, good.
So we're talking about her home area. But just when you start to talk about public safety. We moved 20 million last year from public safety back into the T fund here. That back and forth between public safety and we've dealt with that for years, and we took a step last year. As Jeremy and the secretary here talk about refocusing priorities, it all just sounds so similar to everything that we're going through at the same time as you. And in the paralyzation about doing anything around this is it's difficult and complicated, and it actually is good to hear that we're not alone. And that that I think knowing that we're not alone hopefully helps us focus more on what do we do going forward, not pointing fingers. And I personally want to thank you for that. And at that point, do we have questions from the Pat?
Yes, thanks, Commissioner. I'm wondering if the toll revenues from your turnpikes adequately funds the maintenance on those segments, or did it ever, or did it now? I guess.
So, I always say on the turnpike system, because of the bond covenants and some of the other not restrictions, but other structures there, unlike I think some of the rest of our system, the turnpike has kind of a trickle down effect there. We have to pay the debt service first. We pay operations and maintenance costs. Then we do the R&R work, that's rehabilitation, restoration to keep up that system. Every 5 years, we have an independent consultant that does an assessment of what we should be doing to, and what investment level that R&R work should look like for the paving, for the bridges, for the culverts and things like that. So after we take care of debt service, operations and maintenance, and R&R work, only then do we talk about whatever's left for turnpike revenue going to capital improvement projects like the two major projects I referenced. And we're at the point now where the revenue is currently, keeping up with those first three priorities, but the revenue is not there to support the capital improvements. So hopefully that answers your question. Right now, the turnpike revenue is keeping up with the overall operations and maintenance, the debt service and the R&R work, but we don't project having sufficient revenue to take on any major capital projects, intersection, interchange, reconstruction or roadway segment widening.
Yeah, thanks.
Other questions?
Mr. Beth, what is on your one chart you had transporter revenue and other revenue? Forgot what it was called. On top of your tolls, there's a small, I think the most one you were thinking. That bar.
Oh, transponder and non-operating revenue?
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some various aspects of managing the turnpike system that have non-toll related information. The transponder fees that go to Easy Pass management, we've taken that out of the overall budget for various reasons. And I think some of the other non-operating revenue periodically have sales of property, surplus property, and some other interest-bearing accounts that result in some of that non-toll revenue.
Thanks.
I know, normally I have a lot of questions, so I'm trying to.
Really,
Well, I have I would say, well, thank you so much for coming. Normally I'm like full of questions, but I have so many because there is some differences that are very interesting.
And the biggest difference I noticed that's most interesting is that you have a special dedicated amount of money from your gas tax that goes directly to municipalities, if I'm understanding correctly. So I'm wondering, I have long thought that would be a great idea for Vermont, and I'm wondering if you could explain that, and if you're then seeing your towns get adequate funding, and how it's a different approach than what we have in Vermont, where we set it aside in our town highway aid process, compared to, it sounds like just an automatic block grant funding that you do through that.
It is. Yeah, so by statute, 12% of all road toll, gas tax, and motor vehicle fees. So it's set in statute that 12% goes to cities and towns. DOT, we administer that with our Treasury Department. And it's distributed by formula. So 50% of the formula is based on population. The other 50% of the distribution is based on inventoried roadway mileage. Yeah, I mean, depending on the size of the town, the community, and stuff, the outlays vary, but it does go directly to those communities in their budget. Ostensibly by the law, that it is, to go to roadway improvements, roadway work, but it's not tracked as an individual thing. Typically, we look at town reports, and as long as their public works budget, is greater than what they're receiving in block grant aid, which it generally is, we consider it, it's that's what the town is putting it to that work. I've never worked in a municipality, so I don't have a good sense on how big a portion of those community budgets that block grant aid is. But from the distribution end, I do know that they depend on it, where we distribute those payments quarterly, and then there's a true up for actual revenue in the last quarter, and we always come June, we're getting calls from the municipalities wanting to know what that final true up number is. So I infer from that they do depend on it quite a bit. So.
Thank you very much. If I'm following Commissioner Cash correctly regarding the revenue sources that 12% is calculated from, and I acknowledge it's quick math here sitting in the corner. I suggest that we look carefully because I think we far exceed 12%. And if I'm following the commissioner, he's referring to gas tax and motor vehicle fees. If you look at the nearly $100 million we put into our fiscal 25 budget in relation to the collected motor vehicle and gas tax fees, and the $97 million we put into our fiscal 26 budget as relates to the collected gas tax and motor vehicle fees, you will find that ratio is much greater than 12%. So I will more than willing to stand corrected on my math, and that's not a criticism of New Hampshire. My point is, I want to make the point that if we're looking at ratios and thinking that's, and I understand the motivation, and you didn't offer it that way, Senator, about something in statute. Totally got that. I'm just saying, I believe the factual calculations that we've put forth every year in our budgets show a very, very, I'll say liberal share, if you will, of what's collected through motor vehicle taxes and fees, including gas. That's all.
Yeah, I was trying to think that through as well, like that, what actually is the real dollar?
I couldn't have done it without Candace's support really on the fly here.
But maybe this is the question we can get at another time, because, yeah, and then another thought that kind of percolates for me, and it had come up in the news. The news had called me, WCAX, to ask me about toll roads.
Right.
Because they had heard that our agency of transportation was looking into toll roads as a funding source.
Let me.
But I don't know where that, but my question to you would be, so it's toll roads have come up quite a bit and you do rely on it heavily for your budget. Well, maybe not heavily, but you rely on it for your budget. And I'm wondering, do you have a different agreement than we do with the federal government where you had those tolls before? Because we would lose a bunch of federal funding if we move forward with any kind of toll roads. But it sounds like you've already done that trade-off and you're not losing money by maintaining toll roads.
I think so. I mean, my understanding and the history of it is why we can do some of the things we did is that the turnpikes in New Hampshire preceded the interstate system. So when I-95 was laid out and I-93, they laid out sections of those interstates over pre-existing turnpikes. So we retained the turnpike designation. I think that's the way a lot of I-95 is, all the way down through, Connecticut, New York, Maryland, and so forth.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you. That helps me understand why you're doing it versus why you're not.
Right.
So unless Senator Harrison, you get
Yes.
one last question because you're the last, and you get the last question, and then we're gonna thank Commissioner Cass and we're gonna have to move on. But
Sure. No, thank you very much, Commissioner, for being here. And I'll just have a quick thank you for the work that your staff is doing down in the Brattleboro, Hinsburg area. Just because it is it's taking a lot of staff time, and I do appreciate it. And I think we're at a resolution or close to a resolution. Just the paving targets, I just want to make sure I'm understanding it. It sounded like you said you have a 500 mile per year goal. What proportion is that of your total? Or just roughly, because I think that's something we're looking at dollars, not miles. And I suspect that we're going to get to a miles goal at some point.
Sure. So I very, I mean, it varies a little bit, but very roughly, I had mentioned in the presentation about $150 million annually goes to our core programs. I would say close to $90 to $100 million of that is invested in our pavement management resurfacing program to try to keep up with that 500 mile. That 500 mile a year target was a very it was relatable for a lot of the legislators and stuff when we kind of explained it. It's like, we've got roughly 5,000 miles of state highways. They should be paved every, at least once every 10 years to keep up with them. So we should be paving 500 miles a year. Cost a ton of asphalt and stuff. You can relate that to a pretty quick, planning target number of what we should be investing. So that's where that came from. But it stuck because it was a very easy kind of and relatable kind of number for people to remember. So
that makes sense. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
thank you so much for doing this, and don't be surprised if we call you back for a period sometime in the future.
Yeah, and if there's any more information or data, either through Joe or Jeremy, I'm happy to provide comparative information or things like that. We work very closely. I think we've always had a kind of a tri-state relationship between Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. We're very, similar geography, similar size agencies, similar issues and stuff. So,
Well, we really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
very good. Thank you all. Have a good day. Happy holidays.
I think now we will, Logan and Candace, you would take the chairs and
The primary chair to you.
Driver's side of it.
Yeah.
Before you start.
Yeah.
Megan, do I have to join the Zoom if I'd like to share? Yes, okay, I will do that. Thank you.
We don't have a way to plug into our screen.
Hmm?
We don't have a way to plug into our screen like they do.
They don't have that transportation anymore.
They don't? They got rid of that?
It failed last,
I got it.
early last year.
Oh.
You broke the German.
Apparently, I'm good at that. Perfect. All right, I have a few slides, to just go over sort of the financial aspects where the two funds looking at today. And then talk about some of the structural things that we have been talking about. Some of this will probably be familiar, especially if you attended the all-member briefing. That'll be a similar presentation to that. And there'll be some slides that maybe Candace will want to speak to in more detail. But we can go from there. So, as I just mentioned, there's sort of the overview. But just to bring everyone up to speed on the transportation fund. So this is the year-end transportation fund revenue. You'll notice there on the right-hand side, fiscal year 25 ended, we were about $7.4 million below what we were forecasted to end with. And that shortfall was pretty much solely due to a decrease in purchase and use tax revenues, as well as the DMV fees, which are sort of related. You can see those numbers there, almost 5% for purchase and use and 3% for the DMV fees. After the year end, we then had the July forecast, which downgraded the T-Fund revenue estimations. So in 2026, downgraded, or FY26 downgraded $7.5 million. Then in 27, we're looking at a downgrade of 7.8, and then it goes up from there. You'll notice we still have decreasing forecast for gas tax and diesel tax. Purchase and use, while seeing most of the downgrade, is still forecasted to grow between 2030, about 3.81% there. And then more moderate growth in the DMV fees and the miscellaneous revenue fees. For a total T-Fund forecasted growth of 1.33%, which, as you all know, is below what we have been seeing for the recent inflation rates. We're soon to get a new forecast from January, so we'll see what comes with that one, and I'm sure I'll be back in here to present those once we have that. Because we had the forecast downgrade of $7.5 million, as many of you know, we had a decision plan. I won't go into the details. Candace, if she wants to, can speak to this in more detail. If you have questions, we can. But essentially, AOT presented this plan to JTOC and JFC, which was adopted, which essentially brought the FY26 budget into balance with the new forecast. And then here we are, year to date for FY26. So this is July through November. The portion on the left is the November revenues, and the portion on the right is on the year to date. So you see that looking on the right hand side there, we are continuing to underperform even against that lowered forecast that we got in July. Right now we're about 1.8% below forecast, or $2.3 million. You will notice monthly we did have sort of a reversal in purchase and use tax revenues. We saw an increase over what we were targeted to by 18%, which was good. We are down in a lot of the other categories though, and as I mentioned, year to date, we are still below forecast. We'll see what happens in the next few months. Hopefully the purchase and use trend continues, but it's too early to know.
Sure. Can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead.
On DMV field fees at a constituent, and then I think a discussion with a JFO staff member, seemed like there might be something to a reduction in DMV fees based on like related to number of vehicles basically that people aren't registering their vehicles. Do we have like multi-year data on that? Like there's just less, or they're not doing it as, before, like you made sure you got it registered or you thought you were gonna get a ticket. Now I talk to people, it's like, I haven't had my car registered, expected for over a year. No police officers.
Sure, that could be, and I could probably pull some data, look yearly at registration, at least revenue. The DMV
I
might be able
assume
to
it'd be
do.
small, but I'd be interested to see if there's been any,
Mhm.
if that kind of hypothesis is shown up in the data.
Something we could dig into. I don't have any numbers to speak to right now, but I could definitely look into that if you want.
Okay, yeah, or I thought DMV.
Yeah, they might also have some numbers on that. I don't know. I'd have to reach out to them, but that is something we can talk about this year for sure. So then just jumping into some of the bigger challenges, which have already sort of been touched on, this year. The big one,
I just would say, I'd like to spend a little bit of time in that when we get, the first of the session back here.
But you're forgetting we're not in session.
No, we're not yet, but this is a preview of what, but we, hopefully to help us focus on what we want. But what I would say about that is, and I say this some for the agency people that are in here, I'd most like to dive into those numbers about who's not registering, how old their vehicle is, what they are. I'm not, I'm gonna show my bias here. I suspect that people with brand new cars that have resources register their vehicles.
Yeah.
I suspect the people that aren't registering their vehicles are in older vehicles. And not only do they make a calculation of I won't get caught, but they also look at their family budgets and go, what can I afford?
Right.
So I think as we talk about that, I want to be mindful that this is not just blanket across the board, what we're trying to do, because there's consequences in the choices we would make. So.
If
Please.
I may, Senator, so Candace Almquist, Agency of Transportation, Chief Financial Officer. We recently just submitted our fee report on Monday, and that's going to have 5 years of data on this, and that would be a good starting point before we enter the session.
Yeah, that, as we get back here, we'll dive into that, because, I think that has a lot to do with, family situations. Right.
I'll go through the rest of these quickly because I think we're running out of time. You all already know this. Revenues are stagnant. They're simply not keeping up with the inflation rate. We've been speaking about that. Fuel efficiency, EVs to a lesser degree, but are all attributing to a decrease in gas consumptions. We have demographic constraints, limiting vehicle purchases as far as registrations, flat fee revenues. And then there's that 1.33% growth that we are forecasting for the T-Fund revenue. And then as Jeremy mentioned earlier, and we've talked about, cost pressures are increasing far faster than T-Fund revenue growth. That National Highway Construction Cost Index has been increasing significantly. We also have salaries and benefits, which have gone up across the state, all sort of adding pressures onto a fairly stagnant T-Fund. So this chart is just sort of looking at that impact of inflation. The green line is the transportation fund as it's been collected or forecasted out in the future years. And then the red line is if you adjust those numbers for inflation, bring them down to 2013 dollars. You can see that right now we're right about where we were as far as purchasing power in 2013. And if the forecast continues as we expect, we will eventually be below purchasing power than we were in 2013. This one all
You use the 3% inflation based upon general inflation within the economy.
correct. Yeah, so 3% is kind of considered the new normal, maybe for future years. We don't know what inflation will actually be, so this is just sort of an estimate. This is just general inflation, not specific. I have another one that looks specific at the construction highway cost index. But transportation does do other things than just road construction. But this is just one way to look at it. You could tie this to a number of different inflation indexes if you wanted.
That would be interesting to see, given what we've heard since 2020 has been the inflation in project costs, what the overall inflation rate was for the agency, because I suspect it's higher than 3%.
Most likely, yes.
Okay.
This chart, the similar one, the green line is that construction highway cost index, and the orange line is the T fund revenues. This is going back to 2010, which at the total change. So you'll see post pandemic, as we were discussing earlier, large increase with a relatively comparatively minor increase in T fund revenues. And then these, and I think Candace will maybe speak to the federal funds one more. But as you know, federal funds make up a large portion of our transportation budget, and as we're all aware, we have to contribute a match to it, which there's a projected state deficit of about $33.3 million in FY27 to meet our sort of federal match. And if we don't have the revenue to maximize this, and we can't keep up with our maintenance and capital needs, infrastructure deteriorates, costs more. These are all the things that we've been talking about this morning. It generally is more expensive to do it tomorrow than it is today. So I'm going to skip over this one because I think Candace will speak to it in more detail. And this you saw from Jeremy. And then just to end it, just to highlight just some things that the General Assembly has done so far. So this transportation issue, as the Secretary mentioned, has been going on for a while. So there's just a few things for the past, 6 years now that we have sort of done, utilizing IIJ money, COVID related fundings. We were paid TID bonds, bring up money. We've used some general fund to help pay for IT modernization, as well as some EV incentives. The MVP increases a few years ago. Also between 2024 and 2026, we set aside general fund money to be used for federal match requirements. And then, as was mentioned earlier, last year we eliminated the $20.25 million annual JTOC appropriation. Again, just a few things that we've done just to sort of jog your memory as you're thinking about things. With that, I will let Candace speak on the things that I skipped over.
Thank you, Logan.
So, Candace, when we get to that, one of the things that I'm interested in is when we did go through the rescission process, there were some things that were we cut. And then there were other things that the timing, we used timing to push some things off into the next year. So of that cut, and you may be going to cover this when you get there, but for me, it would be helpful to understand what's backing into next year and what we actually cut.
Sure. Yeah, I'm prepared to go over.
That starts us from my behind the eight ball if we and puts more pressure on the next year.
Absolutely. You can definitely talk about the decision plan. But would you like to start with the 5-year outlook?
Why don't you start with where you were going to start with? I'm just saying that I'd like to better understand that as when we get there.
So Candace Lundquist again, CFO at the AOT, and I'm going to share my screen, Megan. Is that okay?
Yeah, should be.
Right, we should be looking at the 5-year outlook. This is I know it's small, but I made it as big as I could. So this is a document that should look familiar. The agency has produced this for this committee and the House Transportation Committee since the IIJA in 21. This is a snapshot that was prepared as of September 25 for the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, where we presented the rescission plan. Just a brief orientation. I know folks around this table know this, this outlook. But again, at the top, we're looking at formula funds in the top 3 rows, conservative estimates for 27 through 31, because we don't yet know what the next iteration of the IIJ will bring us. The conservative estimate is a 2.5% inflationary factor. And that was recommended to us by CDM Smith when we were doing the funding study last year as well. The middle of the spreadsheet represents other non-competitive grants, such as the Highway Safety Grant Program, and competitive grants, again, point in time snapshot from September 25. And it should be noted that it's more difficult to project those competitive grants further out into the future. So while it looks like there could be a drop off of competitive grants in 29, I'd say that's really just because we don't know that far in the future right now.
Let me ask you a quick question. Why is there no competitive grants from 23 to 25?
I am working with my team to fill in that historical data, Senator. We definitely had
Right.
competitive grants, yeah. I think it was a factor of a change in the chief
Okay.
financial officer. So the last row here is what we typically focus on during the session, and is what Logan also highlighted. This is the deficit that we projected point in time from September for fiscal 27 through the future. A few things to note about this deficit. We balanced the FY 26 budget on 12.5 million of one-time funds. That was a transfer from the cash fund to the transportation fund. So this assumption is assuming that a similar transfer is not available. So we already know that a portion of the 33 million is the 12.5 that we used last year to balance the 26 budget. We talked about how last session we eliminated the historical JTOC transfer. This assumes that transfer does not continue to happen in future years. If it did happen, then this 33 million would be 20.25 worse.
Wait, can you explain that one more time? Because that's really critical.
The
So,
20 million is permanently not going to public safety.
Safe to us.
yes, so you're saying this is $33 million, assuming that we're keeping the JTOC transfer in transportation.
Correct.
So it's not like this is a $33 million. So if we didn't do the JTOC transfer, which I thought we just made.
It's perfect.
Yeah, okay, so we don't need to do anything this year to make that happen.
Correct.
Okay, sorry, that was where I was getting confused. Thank you.
I just wanted to lay out the assumption of the Agency of Transportation.
It's a good move that we did that.
Okay, so inflationary increases are included for state employees according to the collective bargaining agreement. We have increases including here for town highway aid, town highway structures, town highway class 2 roadway, which is all specified out in statute. But I do want to call out the fact that for all other costs, aside for the ones that I just mentioned, it's assumed to be level funded. So that $103 million paving program that we were looking at, it's assumed that we will once again spend $103 million on the paving program, regardless of the effect on inflation. And I think we have all been talking about inflationary pressures. Jeremy last session testified that our inflationary pressure is around 29%. So effectively, this deficit is saying if inflationary costs are increasing by 29%, we are making up that 29% elsewhere in the budget through decreases in other places in the budget. Just wanted to call that out. And again, like we talked about, if we're experiencing inflationary pressures, the towns are also experiencing inflationary pressures. I know that there's a statutory calculation. Maybe that statutory calculation is not going far enough for the towns. But those are all of the things that I wanted to highlight in this spreadsheet.
When you said you were making up those up, just like by doing what's paid, for example.
Decrease, I mean, the Agency of Transportation budget includes intermodal administration, BMP.
Any project reduction,
Or non-project reduction,
operation, anywhere that you can find it.
right?
But is it saying that you're gonna keep the inflation adjusted at 103 by finding other savings and moving it to paving?
The assumption here is that we would find, cost savings elsewhere.
And move it to paving,
So that paving is at 103. Yeah,
the adjacent of inflation adjusted, cost inflation adjusted. What?
So can I just, in the operating, the maintenance division, we've calculated within that a 3% increase in salaries and benefits for people that work there. But everything that they do within maintenance would be, for the most part, operating, plowing of the roads, those would be operating. Those are all level funded.
that's correct. And the salary, increase is at 5.3%
At
because
5.3.
that is what's specified in the collective bargaining agreement. So yes, the salaries and benefits, 5.3%, but everything else that our maintenance staff are doing, level fund. And again, we can debate whether we want to change that assumption, but just for the purposes of going with something, I wanted to call out that that's what's going on in this outlook. And that has been the assumption in all prior iterations of this outlook as well. So that's not a change.
We'll go to Andy and then we'll.
I just had a question about the cash fund. Was that what kind of like where you put surplus funds? What is the cash fund?
The cash fund is a special capital fund. It is managed by the treasurer's office and the Department of Finance and Management. My understanding is that was specified into the 23 T-bill that we would have access to.
Okay, so it's the capital cash fund.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so yeah, Senator Harrison's fund.
You wanted to.
Thank you. I'm just going to say that I think some of the last conversation really starts to talk about the elements of the 27 budget, which will be delivered in a month. My understanding of the framework Candace was teeing up here was that as we looked at the $30 million hole, which was public knowledge, we had to take certain things into consideration, which is, I think, what she's referring to on like paving, for example, or anything else, aid, whatever you want to call it, as we look to build that budget and deliver it. So it has to be based on some assumptions, but how that whole that I talked about before, I don't mean whole HOLE, but I mean WHOLE, how that whole revenue piece looks like in the total of the budget, the slate will be clearer. Was on the 21st or whatever we need.
I just going to see if I could ask Secretary a question about the 33 million deficit.
Sure.
I think it was 2 years ago, Candace's predecessor. Look, we had a similar projection of a whole, and he was like, "We're not worried about it." Basically, like we have money in other funds that we're gonna deal with it. I just wonder, as the secretary, are you worried about these deficits, or you feel like that's just operational normalcy and the budget will deal with it?
Every year in this job so far, and 6 years prior to that at public safety, and in the 2 years prior to that back in AOT, but not this job, there have been pressures that have to be overcome. I've never seen a budget where we were at a loss to figure out where to spend the money. And I know you're not implying that, and I'm being sincere. But I think what I would frame your recollection of perhaps my position is that we have the flexibility. You heard Commissioner Cass talk about, this was New Hampshire, not us, but you heard Commissioner Cass say they plan at least 2 whole construction years with no new projects. 0. Well, so a construction agency has the ability to slow things down, accelerate things, slow some things down, accelerate some things. And AOT has historically had that flexibility. So my concerns are more over the long term than, in my experience, we have been able to overcome every immediate problem. But I concur with, I think, the general flow of the discussion that the totality of all of those immediate concurrent problems is a systemic issue that have to be addressed. Okay? But when we started meeting in July, you know, we have to work on the assumption that not only are we going to find 30 million, but we have to find the labor contract increase. We have to find the increases for fees for space. We have to find the increases for IT before we even look at cost increases, you know, marketplace pressures. We have to work on that assumption that we have to figure that out. And so we have to make decisions to fill that and then figure how do we grow from there. And so I'm this agency, long before me in this role, under multiple secretaries, guided by various administrations, have been able to contend with the problem at hand. And so I think that was the framework in 23 that I might have been espousing.
Right, well, it wasn't you, it was Brad.
Well, but I'm responsible
Right,
as secretary.
Following your order.
Yes, but Bradley was a good CFO.
Yeah.
And, you know, we can find our way out of every jam, but it gets old. And I think that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about how do we.
We're just trying to go inside. It seems like from legislators, we see that and we're quite worried,
Yeah.
but from the agency's perspective, it's like, well, this is kind of normal.
I would agree with that frame. Yes. Yes.
Well, I would just say, when I hear New Hampshire, we will use them and not talk about. But when you aren't doing any capital projects, there is a cost to that,
Yeah.
because going down the pipe, you're gonna have infrastructure that has fallen apart. And
More expensive.
I'll speak just personally. My father, in the last years he farmed, didn't replace equipment. I inherited old equipment. It's been painful picking, the infrastructure of the farm back up. And I think that's what we can put together a budget and we can muddle through.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And I really actually appreciate that analogy. I think that we should try to use that during the session. But I watched a little bit of the rescission plan that was presented to the e-board. And so you're gonna get into that. Do you? Yeah, that's really good. Because I heard like different competing things and people move from one department to another and trying to make money work that way. And I just don't understand what's going on with the rescission plan at all.
Sure. Well, let me go through it. I don't know of anyone moving that's part of the decision plan, but we'll get.
Okay, because I
there.
heard that folks had been moved out of some of the more general, almost like environmentally focused work to the highway division potentially. And I don't know, I thought maybe that was a part of the
That's not
decision
part of the
plan.
decision plan, no. And that's not currently, I'll let Candace explain the decision plan, but
Okay.
that's a different conversation.
Oh, okay, that's helpful.
Okay, so this is the rescission plan as presented. There is an addendum as well. That was submitted to JTAC, which is on this screen, but I'm gonna flip back over here for just a second. I will frame it up with, Chair Westman's comment, which is wanting to know what has been canceled versus delayed. And then I can go into, I can go into the same detail that I did for JTAC or JFC. But just to start, so items 2 through 6 are either one time or delays. And then item 9, maintenance, the return and or repurpose of device purchased for VAMS, that would be a cancellation. We are not anticipating reissuing those devices.
So we're looking at this document.
Yes, but I also have the spreadsheet on the screen here.
Yeah, so I just want to be looking at the same document that you are.
Yeah.
So item 2 through 6,
2 through 8
2 through 8
are
are delayed.
either delays or what, the way that it's presented one time in FY 26.
It's right. And they total up to how much of the,
It looks like 3.5 million in one time or delays, items 2 through 8.
okay,
Like I said, item 9, 150,000 for return or repurpose of Bama's iPads. That would be a cancellation. We're not running and reissuing those iPads. Item 10, the cancellation of the technology project to automate functions under section 1111. That is a cancellation of a contract. The next items 11 through 13, either delay or one time. And then item 14, position management savings that we do not anticipate bringing those positions back. So that could be considered a cancellation as well.
that's 2.5.
Yeah, I don't think we got this exact spreadsheet. We got like a memo instead.
Yeah,
So
about 3 million of this is cancellation.
Sorry, this spreadsheet with the cover memo plus the addendum was submitted to State Council.
Yeah, I can,
On the back.
yes,
thank you.
oh, perfect,
Thanks.
perfect, thank you.
And then it's up to you, Senator. Would you like me to run through each one of these items or open it up for questions now? I don't want to.
I think if members have specific questions about this, you should ask those questions now. From my point of view, because something more than half of this is delays. And little less than half is cuts. Those delays are going to totally show up in as we move forward into next year's budget. And quite frankly, put a little more pressure on next year's budget. It can't help. But so for me, but if we have specific questions within the committee, you wanted to get those out on the table now, we'll spend a couple minutes on that before we move on. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's obvious, probably the one that I'm most concerned about, which is Springfield. I was very disheartened to have this be like the first thing on the list to go, and kind of reading through the memo and understanding from what you had provided to the e-board, it sounds like this was going to be delayed anyway. So it's not necessarily like a chosen cut that you identified. But I did just want to say that this delay has meaningful impacts on that area. It's a very often used site. I think a 4-bay garage is my understanding is what was being designed. That would have greatly improved the quality of the workers' experience at that location. And it's disappointing to me that again, Springfield is being identified as a place for dog. That seems to so often happen to that community. So to just want to identify that and name that, although I understand that it's a little bit out of your hands because it sounds like the engineering didn't come in or there was other time constraints that would have caused it to not happen on its original timeline anyway. And then I did have one other question, which we might get into with Vermont League of Cities and Towns folks, but I'm already starting to hear rumors from my towns that they're being told that they're having projects cut by the state, that they're not happening in 2027 and 2028 and 2029, and that they should be expecting to have like temporary bridges not be put in or because of decisions that if there's all sorts of conversations that are happening and kind of like a rising sense of panic about, I think, okay, you're cutting this with the rescission plan. What is our expectation for you not funding projects that we had been kind of promised in out years that would be happening? And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to, is that fear rational? Should we be planning differently as individual towns? And what do you think would be smart to do when it comes to advocating to keep certain projects in over others? Because like I'm bummed Springfield got on the chopping block, and if I had been on it maybe 3 years ago, would we be doing Springfield? You know, like how would you figure that out?
Sure. We're gonna take this.
I would first say, we work very close with the league. You know, Mr. Brady very well, worked well. I welcome actual information from actual towns who they actually spoke to at the agency, because there's obviously in any forum, there's worry,
Yeah.
there's rumor, there's conjecture, and they all make sense in this environment. So I'm not trying to dismiss the concern, the worry, but our position has always been, we look at every project that's ready to go. You know, from testimony here, there's a difference between the aspirations the town has about a project and what we might fund in a particular year. But the decisions that we make regarding the projects that are ready to go will be something we deliver in the budget.
Okay.
But if there are agency people that are in fact now telling towns, I really would like to know what town and who did they speak to at the agency if they were informed by us officially that a project is being canceled or delayed that has to speak to the 27 budget, which which our governor has not released yet, and we have not talked to you about. So as the secretary, I would like to know.
Yeah, and I can
There's
give you
specific
specific,
information.
yeah, we do have some specific people coming later today, specific to talk about that.
But I'm saying more
Assessment.
specific than the town's conjecture
Yeah.
or worry.
I don't want to list specific employees on the record. I do have for Pomfret and South Burlington conversations they've had, at least in our area.
Okay,
And I want to be clear that the conversation is not your project is being canceled,
Okay.
figure it out.
Okay.
It's, hey, we're reading the tea leaves as an employee here. And if I was smart, I might not plan on maybe some of those conversations we've had.
Okay,
And
fairness.
that I think is a okay thing as an employee to share. I think that's a generalization that from this conversation alone, I might take. But so
I would
I don't
agree
think
with
it's
the
a
senator on
bad
that.
thing.
Okay, then I think we're
Yeah,
on the same page.
Yeah.
With your last version of that, I think it's wise for everyone to hear everything that's been said. Last session and this session, well, we're not even in the session to your point, Chair, but right now, plus Commissioner Cat. Everybody should be aware of the pressures and expectations may all not be met. But those are the decisions we have to make all the time. And going back to a moment or two ago, we have to make those same decisions every year. We've had to make them for 20 years. So, we're probably saying the same things just from a different direction.
We are behind by about 25 minutes. So if unless there are other specific questions, can you spend the next few minutes just to wrap up? Yeah.
Sure. Responding to Senator White, I'd say the first item that the agency considered for the rescission plan was line 2. And sorry, let me share my screen one more time. Line 2 was an additional 270,000. That was really my discretion as the CFO to add on top of what engineers had requested for projects that are concluding this fall. So that, and I also said this to JTAG, that was the easiest one on the list. And just because of their order in the list doesn't mean that it was like the first to go or whatnot. But I understand everything you said. I think the rescission plan was because of the economic forecast, the downgrade in July. We know that downgrade trickles into future fiscal years as well, which is a part of that 33 million deficit that we were looking at. So I'd like to encourage folks to see it if they could as two separate items, that they are related, but we were statutorily required to present the rescission plan because it's a current year downgrade. And then we will also deal with the future 27 and 28 and 29 hole as part of the governor's, recommended budget proposal. I think that's all I have, unless there are questions.
I'm going to move us along and we do have, two gentlemen from ASHTO and NCSL, and Doug and Jim. And we moved the order around here a little, and we're sorry that we're running late.
That was really.
Okay. I think, Doug, you're first.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Chair Westman.
Introduce yourself and
Nice to see you again. Yeah, can everyone in the room hear me okay?
we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, Chair. It was nice to be in Vermont last week to discuss some of these issues in person with a few of you. And let me just quickly, where do I share? One moment here. I'm struggling to find where to share my presentation from this screen.
There's a green arrow at the bottom.
Megan, any assistance? Green arrow at the bottom? I'm not seeing that.
That says share.
Nope, it's not on my screen. It's usually very intuitive and very easy. I got you. I found it. Just give me 1 second. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, can you see the full screen version? Just affirming
Yeah.
that's the case.
No, we're seeing the.
All right, sounds good. If so, yeah, my name is. You're seeing a presenter mode. All right, well, what's the problem with doing things this way? How about now?
It's bigger.
It's bigger.
We do have printed copy.
I'll just skip the note. Okay. Well, I have notes to refer to on the page. This is always the issue with doing this, is that sometimes the notes, I can't refer to the notes while I'm talking to you, because then otherwise you can see the notes as well. Give me 1 second. Yeah, can you see the full screen, or is that showing my notes if I go down here?
It's smaller than it
We
was.
see your notes.
Please wait. Still.
Got you. Yeah, hold on. This is, we're still, my bad, guys. I'm just gonna go back to normal mode. I think I know this well enough that I can just, yeah, and I'm having some issues with it sharing. Give me a minute. Okay, is it full size? Is it full size now?
No. No.
It says it's loading.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. Oh boy. Give me a moment. Apologies. While I'm doing this, let me just quickly tell you who I am. My name is Douglas Schinkel. I'm an associate director in NCSL's Environment, Energy, and Transportation program, and I am the director of NCSL's Transportation program. I've worked at NCSL for 20 years and represented several committees in the last few years on this same topic, including to the Vermont Senate Committee, I think maybe just last year or 2 years ago. Just give me a second, having issues getting this up. Slideshow mode, this should be better. Jeez Louise. And as you all, gosh. Jim, you want to, well, never mind. I think I've got it now. Does it look good now? Or you can't see it yet because I'm not sharing it yet.
You're not sure.
Jeez Louise. I'm having a lot of technical difficulties right now all of a sudden. Yep, slideshow tab from the beginning. Yeah, and then CSL, can you all, okay, so now, oh boy, jeez, this. No, problem is I can't get to. Okay, can you see in full screen mode now?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'll be trying quick and make up for that time because I certainly want to hear from Jim. Yeah, NCSL is a membership organization, and I think you all know that you are the members, all 7,000 plus state lawmakers and the 30,000 plus legislative staff that support them. And really, I'm just going to run you through what states are doing in regards to investigating, exploring, and enacting and implementing alternative transportation funding sources to kind of supplement the existing kind of traditional sources that we're all kind of aware of. So this first slide I think is kind of the most instructive. This is some information from the National Association of State Budget Officers. And the main thing I would point to is that top blue line, motor fuel taxes. Back in 2016, motor fuel taxes were on average were responsible for 41.1% of state transportation revenue, and they are now 35.9% in 2024. That's not an incredible drop, but that is a very notable drop since this is the biggest source of funding. And the newest version of this report is going to come out in the next few days, and we're kind of going to be very closely watching if that number drops further. But this is just the long-term trend, is essentially that these motor fuel tax revenues are dropping, and states are having to come up with other sources, and you'll see that reflected in the next slide. I mean, the next line down, the red one, that shows that the other category, which oftentimes includes non-user fee options, which states are increasingly having to adopt in some instances, is having to be implemented in some states to make up for that gap. So this just shows, and a lot of this echoes what came from some of the last presentations, is that the purchasing of power, the federal gas tax, this slide is specifically the purchasing power of the federal gas tax, has fallen precipitously since 1993, when federal gas taxes were last increased. So we're dealing with just not really having the amount of money necessary for the cost that states still have to pay for their transportation systems. This is another slide kind of showing that same projection, well, not the same projection, but similar into the future, and still projecting that while the nominal revenues may stay somewhat flat, decline some, that in terms of real revenue, that's going to decline fairly dramatically. Then this is kind of a complicated slide, but I did want to point this out. I know some of the speakers spoke to the fact that really at the moment, what states are dealing with they're dealing with increased fuel efficiency is what's driving the decline in motor fuel tax revenue. But of course, alternative and electric vehicles are playing a role in that as well. And what this shows is essentially that yellow line at the top is if there was no change in the current fuel efficiency of America's fleet, what we would expect to collect nationally in terms of fuel tax revenue. But then the three lines below it show varying forecasts of adoption rates for electric vehicles. And depending on those, you start to see a very large gap, a gap that's already going to be kind of existing, but it's going to grow even worse if there's more and more folks adopting, buying electric vehicles. I would note that one thing that came up a lot when we were in Vermont last week is it does seem notable that northeastern states appear to divert more of their transportation dollars to other sources than other regions. States in other regions are more typically have things like transportation lockboxes and some sort of guarantee that does not allow this money to be diverted. Now, I would note too that there is one pretty big caveat here, which is that this is specific to highways and roads, and diversions do include transit and bike pedestrian, which are clearly transportation, but they're not necessarily highways and roads. And the Northeast, I would say generally, is probably has more robust transit infrastructure and systems, and some of the states clearly there's lots of folks using those systems. I wanted to point that out, but I do think that this is a notable slide. So then I'm going to just quickly go into what states have been doing to kind of to increase or keep stable, really not increase, but keep stable the amount of revenue they're bringing in. So the first and most obvious is, state gas tax changes. We have seen 35 states and DC increase their gas tax since 2013. There are now about half of states that have indexed or variable rate gas taxes, meaning that those gas taxes track with the economy in some way, consumer price index, or perhaps population growth, or sometimes there's a formula in place. And these state gas taxes increases ranged considerably. This is what I call the catch-all slide. This is better to kind of look at and kind of dive into and not try and get a full picture of right in the moment. But essentially what this is trying to communicate to you that there are a lot of different ways that states trying to pay for their transportation systems. And some of them are pretty unique and some of them are probably not going to be possible in all states, thinking about like oil and gas, severance tax, mineral revenue, things like that. But there's some other things that I do think that are pretty applicable to most states. You see some things that are very clearly not related to transportation at all, too, like tobacco tax, lottery funds, et cetera. But this is really just to demonstrate that states are exploring a wide suite of options to fund their transportation systems. Electric vehicle and hybrid vehicle registration fees. We're now in a place where 42 states have higher annual registration fees for electric vehicles. That's quite a sea change from even 5 years ago, and it's probably about 25 states. So most states haven't enacted and implemented these yet. The fees range quite a bit, from $50 all the way up to $290. And then a trend we've been seeing of late is that more states have been implementing a higher fee on plug-in and or non-plug-in hybrid fees. And what we've seen generally is that the highest fee amount for electric vehicles, generally or almost always for a higher fee for electric vehicles, and then not plug-in hybrids and then non-plug-in hybrids, because that's not all states have those. You can see some of the kind of the fee ranges for hybrids there. I want to talk quickly about road usage charges or mileage-based user fees, which I think you're all pretty familiar with and have heard probably quite a bit about in the past. So I'll try and kind of go over pretty quickly, but happy to answer questions. I do want to note there are 4 states that do now operate a voluntary road usage charge or MBUF program. All 4 of these states, in Oregon, Utah, Virginia, and Hawaii, all 4 of these states created these programs through the state legislature. So they did have to be vetted and go through the legislative process and be created. They are all voluntary at this time. However, in Oregon, it will become mandatory, and let me pull this up. In Oregon, the program will become mandatory for all electric vehicle owners beginning in, forgetting the date, I want to say it's 2031, but it's escaping me at the moment. This is partially in response to, as you'll notice here, that Oregon has the oldest program, but it has the least number of enrollees. And so they were really trying to do something to juice up the numbers of enrollees in this. So in the short term, they're doing some things to do so, but basically what will happen is that there's going to be a significant increase in the electric vehicle fee in Oregon to $340. That's going to happen in a few years. And you're going to basically have the choice of, do you want to pay this giant fee or do you want to enroll in the Orgo RUC program? And then at a certain point, it's going to become mandatory for electric vehicle owners to enroll in that RUC program. And I think I'll just note that more enrollees means a more efficient program and more opportunities to kind of smooth out any issues. And also you're just, you're reducing the overall cost by getting more vehicles in it. Utah was the second state to implement a program, fairly successful thus far. They made some changes. It was EVs. What previously did include some grandfathered hybrid vehicles and some other vehicles, but they've mostly made it focus on electric vehicles now going forward. And they do offer a variety of reporting methods for that mileage, which of course is one of the main issues that folks ask. And then in Hawaii, kind of an unusual case, they don't have any. They have an annual inspection process, just like Vermont, so they have a very easy way to collect this fee. This fee, the road usage charge, was just started in July of this year in Hawaii. This is another state where the RUC will eventually become, RUC enrollment will eventually become mandatory in 2028 for electric vehicle owners. So we're moving towards legislatures considering making these programs mandatory for certain groups of vehicles, typically electric vehicle owners. I want to spend a tiny bit of time on Virginia. Virginia's system set up quite a bit differently, and I think probably the most notable thing about it is it has the largest number of enrollees, and the reason it has the largest number of enrollees is because it is not just for alternative fuel vehicles and including electric vehicles. It also includes fuel efficient vehicles that are rated over 25 miles per gallon or over. And so essentially in the state of Virginia, drivers have to pay a highway use fee, and they can choose to either pay the highway use fee or enroll in this mileage use fee program. And so a lot of folks are in Virginia are doing that. And I heard that this number of enrollees from presentation just yesterday is now up at about 26,000 actually. So they're making some progress there. And like I said, I think the big point there is that they're including the fuel efficient vehicles that are also a drag on, one of the big drags in the short term on transportation revenue. I just want to highlight some other sources of revenue that states have been considering. 13 states and DC now charge additional fees for rides in a transportation network company vehicle. Transportation network companies are services such as Uber and Lyft. And of course, you have some emerging autonomous ride hailing services such as Waymo. I would point to the states in blue. Those are the states that really actually are dedicating this fee to transportation purposes. In the other states, the fees are generally being dedicated to the general fund or for administration and oversight and regulatory oversight of the TNC kind of safety and operations. I would note that Georgia is using all the money from these TNC fees for their transit systems. A lot of that's going on in New York as well, New York City specifically, and then Massachusetts dedicates about half the money to its transportation trust fund. And these fees range from, I don't have this represented on the slide here. If I could see my notes, I could possibly see that, but from about 5 cents up to like $1 per ride. And so usually there's discounts for per a shared ride. Something else that we've seen a lot of interest in, but only 2 states have enacted thus far, is delivery fees. Colorado and Minnesota are the 2 states with these delivery fees. And I think a lot of the thinking here was that during the pandemic, there was this even more of a seismic shift towards the use of delivery services, door-to-door delivery services, and that causes kind of an additional strain on the transportation system, adds to congestion, can kind of impact parking situations, etc. And so 2 states have enacted these fees. They look quite a bit different. Colorado's is much broader. Basically, if you buy anything, even if it's a $2 burrito from 7-Eleven and you get that delivered via DoorDash, you're going to pay this 27-cent fee. Now, businesses with $500 or less, $500,000 or less in annual sales are exempted from the fee. Minnesota has a similar kind of exemption, but I think that what purchases are included is a big distinction between these. In Minnesota, the fee is 50 cents, but it only applies to retail delivery purchases over $100. And it also exempts many items, including medical products, things for baby products, and food. And I just want to give you a sense here. This is generating a pretty decent amount of revenue in Colorado, the state where I'm located. And so you'll see that, the revenue over 100 million last year, and they're saying that they're projecting that that's going to likely be even higher in 2026. And we have seen a couple other states looking at this, debating bills, but no other states have yet enacted. Kilowatt hour charges or electric vehicle public charging station fees. So there are now 11 states that have put some sort of fee or tax in place. If you're charging your electric vehicle at a public EV charging station, these don't apply to residential charging. That's technically possible, but it's difficult and it's more cost intensive. Perhaps long term that might be more possible, but in the short term, might be not worth the juice that you're squeezing. I would say, one of the main reasons, just maybe highlight one pro and one con for my estimation, is that one reason I've heard from a lot of states that want to do this is because they're, if you have someone driving through your state and they typically in the past had to stop and fill up on gas, they were paying a little bit of motor fuel tax. If they're now going through the state and doing that with an electric vehicle, they're paying nothing. So this is a way to try to hopefully capture some revenue from that group of drivers. I would say the one potential con is that, you're bringing in a stakeholder, the utility providers. Do the utility providers really want to get in the business of helping figure out this state transportation funding system and collecting this? Now, they're usually collecting fees already and taxes, so it's maybe not that difficult, but I do think that is one consideration. And then these are just some of the funding resources we have available they wanted to share. And then really that's my presentation. And sorry, I try to go as quickly as possible. Happy to take any questions, and thanks for having me.
Doug, I think we're going to go directly to Jim, and if you can hang on here for a while. Jim, could you introduce yourself? And we're only 20 minutes behind now, but that's, we're going to go through lunch.
Well, I am, hopefully I can help you get back a little bit more of that time. And I'll start by just saying that Doug and I had the opportunity to present about a year ago as well. And one of the things that I think we both found was our presentations were very similar. So I'm just going to build on some of the things that Doug said and try to kind of expedite my presentation so that we can get to questions. Just really quickly, my name is Jim Timon. I'm the executive director of AASHTO. I'm going to share my screen just for a couple of slides, not anything that's critical, but I think it may help things go a little bit quicker. And just to say that, us at AASHTO, our association we're a nonprofit association. We were founded in 1914. Our members include the 50 state departments of transportation around the country. So VTrans is one of our members. They're one of our more active members. We have employees that serve in leadership roles throughout the organization. And it's really, we serve as the trade association for the state DOTs and provide that platform to be able to exchange best practices, but also to be able to identify expertise in all the different discipline areas that a state DOT has. I want to talk a little bit about things at the federal level because I think it does have an impact on what you all are dealing with in Vermont. The federal gas tax has not been increased since 1993. The first few decades after 1993, federal revenue continued to increase because population grew and people were driving more miles. But now what we've seen is as vehicles have become more efficient and the population growth has kind of leveled out, we're not generating as much revenue at the federal level as we used to. So as a result, Congress has had to transfer about $275 billion over the last 20 years from the general fund, general tax revenue, into the Transportation Trust Fund that funds the federal surface transportation programs. So if you think about since 1993, when the last time the gas tax was increased, the purchasing power of that tax in 1993 has diminished significantly. So this slide here shows just kind of a basket of goods and what they cost in 1993 versus what they cost now. I am the father of twin daughters who are seniors in high school. So that first one up there is big for me. The college tuition has increased 721% since 1993. I'm looking at sending two girls to college next year. So I really wish it were still 1993. That would be a little bit of an easier hurdle to get over. But the federal government, there just hasn't been the appetite to increase the gas tax since 93. And as a result, they've had to find other sources to fund transportation. Now, quickly, just about, I'll stop sharing here because, I think it's easier to just talk a little bit more about one other thing at the federal level before I move on to what we're seeing in other states. 4 years ago, the federal government Congress passed the largest transportation bill ever. It included a significant increase in federal funding for state DOTs, about 25% increase. But inflationary pressures that we saw in 2021 and 2022 pretty much completely wiped out that increase that states were seeing. Essentially, rather than being able to add new projects to the pipeline, most states were lucky to be able to just keep the projects that they had in their pipeline prior to this federal bill being passed, because the increase that we saw in the cost of materials and the cost of labor in the transportation sector was around, between 20 and 25% over that 2-year period. So most states really were struggling to kind of move forward with their plans, even with the large increase in federal funding. So moving over just quickly to the state side, I think Doug did an excellent job of kind of putting together the kind of the landscape for what different states are doing when it comes to revenue. Every state in the country has some type of a tax on fuels that goes towards transportation. Some of those states restrict it to just transportation. Doug's slide showed that there are, about half of the states that do allow for some quote unquote diversion, but most of that diversion is towards other transportation purposes, not just highways and bridges. So it's diversion to bike and ped infrastructure or transit. There are a handful of states, though, that do take other revenue or transportation revenue sources and use them towards non-transportation. Texas is one that always comes to mind. They dedicate about 25% of their fuel tax revenue for education purposes. But really what we've been seeing in recent years is the opposite. We've seen states take a look at all of their revenue sources that they have at their disposal and see if they can find new revenue sources or portions of existing revenue sources and dedicate them to transportation. For example, Utah, they dedicate about $2 billion a year in general fund revenue to transportation. They've made the decision as in the executive branch and the legislative branch out there to say they believe investing in a well-funded and well-functioning transportation system is critical to economic growth. So they have justified transferring general fund dollars to the transportation program in Utah. Doug showed his kind of catch-all slide that included some of the things that I was going to talk about, including that some states dedicate a portion of their corporate tax revenue or fees on oil and gas production or mineral royalties. Some states take a portion of property tax revenue or sale or taxes on the sale of property. And then you have some states that kind of look at those, what we'll call like sin taxes, lottery, alcohol, tobacco, and dedicate some of those revenue to transportation as well. Finally, we're seeing, as Doug again mentioned, there are others that are connected to transportation where we're seeing more and more states see those activities as opportunities for additional revenue for transportation, fees on electric vehicles, increases on just your standard license and registration fees, taxes on tires or auto parts and dedicating those to transportation, taxes on the sale of vehicles at the state level and dedicating those to transportation are a few of those other kind of sources of tax revenue that we're seeing states go to. There are several states over the past 5 years who have established blue ribbon commissions or task forces to look at the options that are out there for funding transportation in the future. Delaware has a task force on sustainable transportation revenue that they stood up this year. New Mexico in 2024 has set up a task force as well. North Carolina and Pennsylvania both have kind of blue ribbon commissions that they've stood up as well to look at revenue sources, as well as one of your neighbors in Maine back in 2020 has stood up a blue ribbon commission to take a look at this as well. So as you heard from Commissioner Cass from New Hampshire earlier, I think what's happening there and what you're dealing with in Vermont with the increase in the cost of projects and labor due to inflation is not something that is unique to Vermont. We're seeing that in states across the country, and states are looking at a lot of different ways to deal with that. Whether it's new revenue in order to be able to support the increase in cost associated with inflation, or if it's kind of refocusing the existing revenue that they have on those must-have projects, right? Focusing more on maintenance and of existing facilities and making sure that the existing network that you have is able to run as best it can. We're seeing state DOT agencies across the country really having to tighten their belts and making kind of those decisions. Obviously, we believe that there should be additional revenue as a whole, and that investing in transportation there's a great dividend or return on that investment from an economic standpoint. But we also see that a lot of states are really struggling financially with decreases in revenue and with other competition for general revenue sources. So with that, I'm happy to hand things back and take any questions that you may have.
Well, I want to, at this point, we're so far behind. This is not the last time we're going to be hearing from you. I personally am going to say that the miles traveled states, the 4 states that we will be looking for contacts on who to talk to from those states. And so we will be circling back around and in touch with the both of you, and thank you. And at this point, we're going to move to the League of Cities and Towns. And Josh, if you would take the chair, introduce yourself and kick us off. Yep.
I'm gonna start with you. We're not taking a break.
Thank you, Josh Denford from League of Cities and Towns. I'm going to be very brief because we do have 4 folks lined up from municipalities to speak to you. I know some of them are on some time commitments. So thank you for starting so early in the session, working on this important issue.
We hope this will help kick us off to help our thinking about where we're at.
Absolutely. And inviting some of the municipalities in to share their needs and challenges. As I said, we'll be brief. So you can hear from those municipalities. From the League's perspective, we've elevated transportation funding in our priority list this year. We have a number of ideas on how to raise the funds needed to fund and fix the municipal roads and bridges that all Vermonters use. We are open to all solutions to diversify and increase the transportation fund revenue. We believe municipalities can be part of this solution if authorized to raise transportation funds locally. And as I said, we have some ideas around that. We also will make the call that you've heard today from many others that delaying solutions only costs us more in the long run. Not really a viable option. So please invite us back to share our transportation priorities and revenue ideas, because all Vermonters depend on these local roads to be safe. And after all, roads are one of the first obligations that laid out in state statute for local government. So with that, I know that Ryan has a time commitment. Megan, did you hear from anyone else that had time sensitive needs?
Yes, but I don't have that written down.
Okay, so let's go with Ryan.
We're gonna do Ryan.
Ryan.
You're gonna be here till the end, right?
I didn't realize.
What's that?
You're gonna be here.
Yes. So Ryan.
I was regretfully a little late with submitting my testimony to Megan, so I have a few correct copies here for the record. Good morning. My name is Ryan Rich. I'm the town administrator in Royalton, Vermont. Chairman Westman, Vice Chair White, Ranking Member Brennan, other distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of the town of Royalton, thank you for your attention to the VTrans funding shortfall, the potential impact on Vermont towns, and the opportunity to provide testimony today. In recent years, Royalton has been the fortunate recipient of VTrans funding. A Class 2 paving grant helped our town afford the reconstruction of our North Road. Grants and aid funding allowed for a highway crew to improve water management and erosion control through multiple ditching projects on back roads. An emergency grant helped us repair bridge abutments after the July 23 flood. Without these critical funds, our town would not have been able to afford these necessary repairs. Today, lingering pandemic-related supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, tariffs, and the increased cost of production and trucking have caused construction prices to increase dramatically. Prices for hot-rolled steel have surged 90%, concrete 40%, and asphalt over 25%. Fiscal analysts have estimated that the total construction costs have increased 62% in Vermont since 2020. Now more than ever, Vermont towns are reliant on state funds to help repair our crumbling and aging infrastructure. Royalton has experienced these consequences of rising costs firsthand. In 2020, Royalton was awarded a VTrans bike and pedestrian grant of $904,000 to reconstruct the South Royalton Village sidewalk. In the time it took for engineers to design the project, receive National Environmental Policy Act approval, and clear right-of-way, our estimated project costs increased from $1.1 million to over $2.5 million. Even accounting for the $500,000 in matching funds that the town has already raised, we have a $1.3 million shortfall. Royalton is hoping to apply for and receive an enhancement grant, but given the VTrans budget shortfall, the guarantee of additional funds is uncertain. VTrans is also facing the same pressures of rising construction costs and decreasing tax revenue. Difficult decisions must be made, and state officials have already begun discussing potential cuts and cost-saving measures, such as transportation project delays. The two publicly announced project delays in Rutland and Springfield are likely just the tip of the iceberg, and that is why I am before the committee today. To state that it is imperative to fully fund core VTrans projects, and specifically the maintenance and repair of town bridges. Royalton Bridge 30, commonly known as Fox Stand Bridge, is a town-owned historical truss bridge built in 1928 to carry Royalton Hill Road over the White River. In May of 24, VTrans inspectors discovered critical findings in the bridge's floor beams and gusset plates and closed it immediately to avoid potential injury or death. Royalton is bisected from east to west by the White River, I-89, and the railroad, which makes north to south travel extremely difficult. The closure of Fox Stand Bridge leaves only two remaining crossings in Royalton, resulting in an extensive detour route that adds over 7.5 miles northbound and 4.5 miles southbound on Class 3 gravel roads. This route may only be time-consuming in ideal conditions, but in snow and mud season, this route becomes nearly impassable. Residents on the west side of the bridge are effectively stranded at times, and there's a high potential of life-threatening situations for the 80 affected families. The delayed response times from fire department, rescue squad, and law enforcement have caused many sleepless nights to myself, other public servants, and first responders in Royalton. Lasting economic harm has been done to the multiple independent and family-run businesses due to the bridge closure. Farm stands on the west side of the bridge are now inaccessible and can no longer rely on through traffic. The loss of income has caused them to shutter. Residents faced with longer commutes to work now travel at dangerous speeds past working farms and homes. The closure has also caused the town to incur additional costs and premature maintenance due to the increased traffic volume on the detour route and town bridges. Construction of the replacement is currently planned to begin in 2027, and the bridge is scheduled to reopen in the fall of 2028, more than 4 years since its closure. Phasing or further delay in the construction of the Fox Stand Bridge replacement would be absolutely devastating to our community. I respectfully urge the committee to prioritize the Fox Stand Bridge project due to the length of closure, the economic impact, and the number of families negatively affected. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the town of Royalton, and I welcome any questions from the committee.
Oh, I just want to say thank you so much for coming, and apologies for missing the first part of your testimony. What we've spent the majority of our time talking about this morning has been the expected impacts of a lack of funding. And you have very articulately expressed what a delay means now for your community. How do you as a municipality plan if you're expecting there'll be even less money coming to you to resolve any current issues or incoming issues on your roads?
Senator Wayne, that's a great question. Municipal financial planning is extremely difficult, especially on town budgets. It's a goal of the town to be slowly putting funds aside. Unfortunately, with given other capital improvement projects, the town has depleted our capital improvement reserve. We have bonded already for a project, which adds to our debt service and taxes on our town budget. So it is very difficult to plan as a municipality, given the cost of construction, inflation, and other costs increasing dramatically every year. So we actually did a price proposal and price schedule if we did accept a temporary bridge that was offered to the town. That would have pushed the project out approximately 10 years and increased the price, and the town would have ended up having to pay $1.1 million for that bridge instead of $300,000 for a bridge, let's say 3 years from now. So you can see right there that the costs would have been easily over, close to $1 million more if the project was delayed.
Yeah, and you as a community don't have the ability to raise a tax. I mean, you could do a 1% tax, but Royalton isn't filled with hotels like White River Junction.
They could raise their property.
You could raise your property taxes. I mean, yeah. Do you see that as an option? Is there another way for you to meet that demand? Do you see the people of Royalton being comfortable with the property tax increase to make up the difference?
So as a citizen of Royalton, I've seen just in the 5 years I've lived in town, the property taxes have almost doubled. I think affordability is a top concern of residents of Royalton, and adding additional property taxes is likely to push hardworking Vermonters out, and we would hate to see more and more working Vermont families have to leave and seek employment and housing outside the state.
Thanks. Two other questions. If you want to comment?
Well, I would like to just make a correlation to the statement made by the administrator. I really think it's important that the committee consider when it talks about these concerns and these realities with its colleagues in the building. In the past, when we've talked about thinking how Act 250 impacts transportation projects like a bridge or already a road, I'm not talking brand new construction. I think, isn't it a different conversation than the larger Act 250 conversation? And my point of making is that I believe the administrator said on a particular project, permitting right of way and environmental created delays on that project that resulted in a 100% increase in price from $1 million something to 2.5. I'm not suggesting that's all because of Act 250 review, because honestly, I don't know anything specific about that project. But my point is, if we do engage in these discussions specific to transportation projects, there may be there's this cacophony of reasons why things are so expensive, and time is one of them. Time costs money. So it's not just Act 250, but it could be permitting, and a lot of that is on the state. I understand that and agree, but I just leave that with you. Because we face the same thing. Our projects also have to go through that. And that's why we've raised that issue.
I think, thank you so much for being here, Mike.
Thank you.
Next, John.
Did you hear any other folks online that have time concerns?
No.
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Nicholas Strelick-Castro. I'm the Berry City Manager. I apologize. I have some notes that I got from my public works director that I didn't have written testimony, but I will share they're mostly numbers, but I will share that with Megan when I get back.
Don't worry, we're gonna have you back in the winter.
Okay.
As you've heard, the difficulty for us is there are no hard numbers.
Yes.
In the overall.
I have some. I do have some.
So we have to rely on individual communities. Some have done a really good job. Others haven't had the resources that others have had to do it. So larger communities like Berry generally have it. The small communities have not done inventories, for the most part. So for us, particularly with the municipalities, it's a little more difficult to ferret out information.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I do have some of our experiences to share. I do want to say we do enjoy working with AOT. Joe has an office right in downtown there. We have the pleasure of getting to stay in very good tenants. And they've done a lot of good things for Barry. One of the best things they did was after we flooded in 23, they helped repave a large section of our North Main Street, which was by the north end, which was completely inaccessible. So I think when the secretary mentioned that they're able to deploy when they need to, that's true, and we've witnessed it. They also helped us with probably to the detriment of the agency's budget, delay of a payment that we owed for the big dig on debt service, which we just paid in this November, but that was due in 2023. And that gave us a lifeboat to get through the immediate impacts of the budget. So I want to thank the secretary because I know I grapple with a lot of similar budgets to what was shown before with trend lines going in the wrong direction. And we're starting to do our budget and we deal with that as well. So I know how challenging it is for the agency to try to make these numbers work. Just as an example as a follow-up to the things that I've heard in the testimony today. Chair, I think you mentioned that the cost of not doing projects is still a cost. And we experienced that. When I started in Barry in 2022, our state highways were in really bad shape. And we were, the schedule at that point to pave it was 2027, which was 5 years, which seemed like a long time away. Now that schedule is 2030. And those streets, they will not make it to 2030. In fact, they are in such bad shape that we as Barry City taxpayers and a Barry City government have spent our own money to pave sections of Main Street. They were gullies that, just because we have the granite trucks moving through, I don't know what the condition was for the pavement that got placed there. It wasn't great, but because I don't see that condition on other state roads, but our core Main Street where we have our shops, our restaurants was a danger to people crossing it. And then during heavy rain events, they would become rivers in those gullies that actually pushed water into shops and restaurants. So it became safety hazards. We had another safety hazard on South Main Street. We have spent out of Barry City money, $137,000 to pave sections of the road that belong to the state, that are the state's responsibility, that we simply could not wait for. And when we knew we were willing to hold on to 2027, when we knew it was 2030, that just became not possible. We had to do it for the benefit of our residents. And so that's a cost to our taxpayers on a much smaller tax base, right, than the whole state. A city that's gone through floods, a city that doesn't have we're 4 square miles without a lot of grand list constraint. So that was a huge hit to us. We also know that as part of the delays that have happened, there's a Quarry Street intersection delay that a project that's been delayed since I started, which was part of our paving project this year because Quarry Street was one of our worst streets. And we reached out to AOT to say, hey, is anything going to happen on Quarry Street next year? Because we really like to add it to our paving plan. They said not till 2030 again, right? So these are projects that are lingering, that there's a real consequence to, for our city and our residents and our taxpayers. Just as the state costs have gone up, I don't want to, I just want to give you our data points on this. Everyone's costs are going up. I'm very sympathetic to that. And 3 years ago, we paid about $44.77 per linear foot of paving. 2 years ago, or last year, I'm sorry, we paid $61.77 per linear foot of paving. And this past paving season, we paid $73.84 per linear foot of paving. It is going up. That is just, I know you've heard it from everyone. That's just our data points, from $44 to about $73 per linear foot. And then my last point is, as the agency does grapple with projects to cut and priorities, I would encourage dialogue with locals. And in fairness to Joe, I haven't mentioned this, so we'll be hearing it for the first time. But I think 2 years ago, the state paved Route 62, which connects basically to downtown Barry from Highway 89, from I-89 to Hospital Hill. Large stretch of road. It's beautiful now. It was in much better shape than our Main Street. And so I think looking back on it, if we'd known, I think this was possibly before the bottom fell out of everything. If I'd known then that we were looking at a delay till 2030 of paving our main street, of the streets where residents drive on, live on, shop, where our stores are, I would have asked the agency, like, hey, can we at least shift the section of 62 that's in Barre city limits to do some of our main street, right? That was not, it was, the conditions weren't even comparable, right? And then I think if you, Senator Perch, if you probably know your local, you could probably attest to that. So, just a suggestion, and I think that it's really important to do that, especially as resources become constrained, because I get it, you can't do everything, and I get it, you have to cut programs. But if there are projects, for example, on the paving side that maybe, certainly in that case, we would have asked for a shift to our main street as opposed to 62. So thank you. Thank you, Chair. I look forward to being back, and welcome any questions.
So in your paving plan for the city, do you have, and I'm not asking for this minute, but have you done an assessment within that plan of where you'd like to be, where you are, how many things are backed up, and have you got anything in detail that you could come back sometime and present to us?
Absolutely, Chair. What we do is we typically plan about 3 years ahead. We have 3 wards, so we like to hit a ward a year. And what that does for us, it's not just to keep residents happy in every part of the city, but it's also strategic. It reduces deployment costs, right? We can pave more if the contractors are paving within a very constrained part of our city. They don't have to move resources, they don't have to move people. So I'm happy to get that to you, Chair. We have a very solid plan for next year, and then we have very confident plans for the next 2 years of where we're going to be, and I'm very happy to.
Well, as the session starts, we're you have more resources than some communities, and we're going to hear from Cabot. I suspect that Cabot doesn't have quite the resources that Barre City does. Yeah. So, but what are your goals? Where are you falling behind? What constraints do you feel? And we'll have you back to talk about that. And partly we are depending on communities like yours to articulate that, because we don't have the overall numbers to be able to do that. So we can only do this anecdotally to be able to put that. So you will get asked to come back. And
I'd love to be back here. And just one final point, I do want to thank the legislature for one thing you did that does help us in this world, which is increase the amount we get to keep on the local options tax. We do have a local options tax. And when you changed the law to allow us to keep a little bit more, that helps us. That goes right to our capital program. And so we appreciate those steps that you can take to help municipalities, because we may.
This is not criticism of you getting to keep that.
Yeah.
Barre City can do a local option tax.
Yes, correct. Right.
Cabot can't.
Correct. Right.
And so there is haves and have-nots that get created in all this system. And so that always weighs on me too. I have in a 10-town district, I probably have 5 towns that there is absolutely nothing that they could put local option tax on and stuff.
Right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for coming too.
Thank you.
And do you have a preference?
I believe Michael has a time commitment. The LCT board meeting coming up, so maybe go to Mike.
Yeah, sure.
Michael,
Mr. Chairman, how are you?
can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mike Hogan. I'm the chair of the Cabot Select Board, and I'm also a member of the VLCT Board of Directors.
Very good.
Okay.
Can you tell us about the Cabot situation?
Sure. Yes. Well, on a positive note, our roads and bridges are in really good condition post flooding of 23 and 4, which we're really happy about. We have one more project in 26 to do. We established a flood mitigation task force, which I think some of your senators might know about. And we have 2 projects that are in the works right now that should take care of some of the flooding that caused all the problems in Cabot, because we are the headwaters of the Winooski. And we borrowed a lot of money to fix our roads and bridges over those 2 years. On our recent budget talks internally in town, we had a couple of thoughts. I'm not sure we can help you too much on the revenue side, but these are just some areas that we talked about. In Cabot, paving is an issue for us. Right now, we're getting around $200,000 with a 20% match, and a mile of road to be paved is roughly around 300,000 from our perspective, for what we've heard, maybe some more. And to bond down any stretch of road is a big hardship for a town like ours, with our grand list not really growing very much. And one thought we had, this might be a crazy idea, but I'm not sure if it's thought about before. When the state awards large paving projects, would they be able to coordinate with local towns that the projects are going by? And I'll give you an example, like they were paving Route 2, which is right near Cabot, and it connects Marshfield, Cabot, and Walden. So in the future, if they were paving that particular road, and these towns know ahead what roads need to be paved, could they coordinate with them to maybe lower the costs that the town would have to pay if they had to do it independently? It's just a wild thought. I don't know if coordination is doable, but it would probably cost less money if the paving company like Pike, for instance, was coming through Marshfield on Route 2. And actually, I'm sure you've heard this before, a lot of towns don't like paying the match that's involved. Right now, it's a 20% match. We have to come up with that. So that's an issue that we would like to see change, but we know there's constraints now with revenue, so that's probably not a great idea. The Better Back Roads and the grants and aid projects have been really helpful for the town. We appreciate AOT. I think the town has a really good relationship with the Agency of Transportation, especially after the floods of 23 and 24. They were very helpful coming out and inspecting all of our bridges. So our infrastructure, Mr. Chairman, is in pretty good shape right now. One last piece, just we were talking about recently also, was capital purchases of equipment. I know in the state, at least at one time, they had a fleet program for vehicles. Is it a good consideration to think about a fleet program for town? When a town has to buy a truck costs over $300,000, as an example. We found something in Dover, Vermont. They were refurbishing town trucks for half the price. We're going to get one of our trucks refurbished this year and get at least 5 or 6 more years of life out of that truck, to instead of putting out a $300,000 vote for the citizens of the town. I think that would be helpful. What I'm getting at is that, is there any chance for the state to look at any kind of program that would buy in large purchases like town trucks or graders or loaders that are big capital costs for towns? They end up stretching these purchases out for years until the equipment eventually just breaks down. And it's a big cost to the citizens of the town, especially in their taxes, if we have to buy a new grader or a new loader that could cost as much as $500,000. So that's some of the areas that we're concerned about. Our highway budget went up a little bit this year. We're very cost conscious. We're very considerate of the taxpayers, how much they have to pay, but we know the roads have to be maintained, and that's our responsibility. So overall, I think our town is in good shape. I think just the area of paving, I think, would be real helpful for us if there could be some changes.
Thank you, Chair. Sir, if I might just address the vehicles. It's my understanding you can do that now through Buildings and General Services, and we can have them follow up with Josh or with you directly.
Okay.
But municipalities are able to buy what the state has contract prices for. And then secondly, I'm sure you may know, but I know Josh knows, but there's the Municipal Equipment Loan Fund, which, you know, no one wants to have to borrow, but if you do, that is it's run by the treasurer's office, but it involves a committee, and they review applications by municipalities for equipment. And historically, it's been at a much lower interest rate, although it's, rates have come down today. So I don't know what the deltas are, but that's another avenue. But you can absolutely get equipment at the state price, but the catch has to be, it's got to be the specification that the state bid. And sometimes a town may want something slightly different, but just closing that loop.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Dan?
The other one.
Thank you, Dan. If you could introduce yourself and.
Sure. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dan Tyler. I'm the Director of Public Works for the town of Brattleboro. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning about maintenance of our municipal transportation infrastructure. As you've heard from many others this morning, maintaining this system has become increasingly difficult under the current funding realities. As a municipality, we're responsible for paved roads and gravel roads, sidewalks, bridges, culverts, stormwater, bicycle infrastructure, and many other appurtenances that support safe travel of our infrastructure. I'd like to focus for a couple minutes on our paving program. In Brattleboro, we maintain over 60 miles of paved roads, recognizing that, we were underfunding this program and there was a gap that was creating difficulties. We undertook a pavement assessment and long-term asset management forecast. So in the summer of 2023, all of our paved roads were scanned with LiDAR imaging, and the imagery was evaluated and scored. In the 2 construction seasons since, we've updated that inventory with completed projects and updated costs, giving us field verified conditions, and rather than assumptions, we know what we've got. 1/3 of our roads, more than 20 miles, are in a state that require major rehabilitation. So, rip them up, redo everything, start from scratch. 17% require minor rehabilitation. Only 12% are in a category that require no work at all. And this is, great thanks to recent V-Trans Class 1 paving project that resurfaced about 4 miles of Class 1 road in Brattleboro in the center of town. That really brought us to that number of no work required at all. If we were in a situation where we could go and bring everything up to par tomorrow, the shortfall would be about $18.8 million. That's just talking paving. That doesn't include drainage, sidewalks, ADA compliance, or any other utilities. Scored a 1 to 100, we're at about a 63.89, which is fair. I think probably pretty typical for the region. But that's despite that Class 1 paving project that I just spoke to that completed about 4 miles of paving. We also received a Class 2 paving grant, which allowed us to do about 3/4 of a mile. And we have about $500,000 of local funding that we put towards our paving projects. So despite all of that, that score is just, slightly up from our 2023 score of 63.5. The numbers show, the modeling shows that we need about $850,000 to $1 million annually to maintain the surface condition that we have. As I mentioned, we're proposing $500,000 for FY27. This leaves a $350,000 minimum gap. And that gap causes delays. And it quickly turns, lower cost preventative maintenance treatments into full reconstruction projects at 3 to 5 times the cost. this isn't unique to paving. We maintain about 36 miles of sidewalk. Given that quantity, and the life expectancy of sidewalk, we should be replacing about 1.4 miles per year. We fund that locally. We seek grants. We do what we can. We're looking at more like a 200-year replacement cycle right now, rather than a 20 to 40-year replacement cycle. Same holds true for the 28 bridges and large culverts and then another 55 retaining walls that we have in town. These are some of our more high risk and expensive assets, but current funding just doesn't keep pace with the deterioration. Our transportation network, we feel, is essential to public safety, economic activity, and community life in town. And we're working as efficiently as possible with deep accountability on, doing what we can, but the gap just is widening and the conditions continue to deteriorate. And current funding sources just aren't keeping up. I think, like I said, a lot of what you've heard today, I thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Dan, so much for coming and for the previous witness. One of the things that's unique about Brattleboro is you do have a high amount of pedestrian traffic. Like when I think about you as a downtown, do you find that when you have paving shortfalls or kind of those, I don't know, meat and potatoes budget items, that you ultimately then spend less money on pedestrian or bike safety related projects? Like, how do you prioritize when you think about your own budget, and how would you prioritize it if you're getting less financial support from the state in future years, which is what I think we're starting to anticipate?
Sure. As the Public Works Director, I put forth a budget recommendation capital replacement plan that includes all of those things you talked about. I mean, sidewalk, also includes retaining walls and structures as well as paving. Ultimately, the taxpayers are not in a position to support the tax increase, and the town manager has to make decisions on what to cut. So for the proposed FY27 budget, there's an effort to maintain that $500,000 worth of paving money, but we've essentially cut our sidewalk and structures monies out.
And I totally respect the need to make those kinds of decisions. I think what makes me most concerned from a safety perspective is as you continue to grow, and this isn't unique to you, this is all downtowns. What really frightens me about our transportation revenue shortfall is I think we're going to see towns that have downtowns where we're trying to grow traffic and grow housing and grow the number of people walking around and biking in those downtowns get less and less money, and they're going to have less and less appetite to improve safety, to improve those spaces, because it's just, I think, as you very rightly put it, like that's a decision and there might not be an appetite for it at your select board, city council, manager level. And I think that is going to increase safety risks and potentially grow our pedestrian death rate in our state, which is very concerning. Even this week, we had someone killed in Vermont who was a pedestrian. So those kinds of things really concern me, and I respect your understanding of your priorities. And I do hope that we're able to provide funding that doesn't cause those types of pedestrian safety measures to be continually put on the back burner.
I will just say, I find your report's great. And you can see a lot of work went into this. And first off, it must be expensive to do this. And your dates of inspection are 2023. When do you plan on doing inspections again?
Typically, they'd recommend a 3 to 5 year interval. I don't think we'll do it this year, probably next year.
What we probably will this is the first time I've got to take a look at this report. We may ask you to come back in and talk about the assumptions and the report itself, the underlying pieces of this. I'm gonna switch just a little and ask Lee, do you know how many communities have done reports like this?
We do not. We can-
Yeah, paving management programs, not specifically, but I do think we track the number of capital plans, which that's usually a component of a capital plan. As you've been talking to our members today, I've been thinking we should put that information together. The overall number of capital plans is low. The league is eager to support towns in coming up to have these plans in place. They are expensive and they are time consuming, and available funding to do what Brattleboro has done here is extremely limited. Yeah, so you have towns competing with each other to get a planning grant to then do a 10-year capital plan.
It would be interesting if you put something out and ask just how many do have that, and we had a list, because it would be, I know it's anecdotal, but if I could look at a half a dozen towns and say, well, Brattleboro's got $18 million hole, and it would just help us quantify this more. And I know that the agency is thinking about how to collect more information, but the plan's great. So at some point we will have it back in Dan to a little more deeply understand all the pieces that are in this. Because it's as good as any community I've seen.
Absolutely. Happy to come back.
Senator Harrison's smiling. So.
Yeah, well, I just want to give a shout out to Dan because he does a great job. And the capital plan is terrific. And I haven't seen it recently, but I don't remember if the capital plan is, I think it's just for this street because it's really important, obviously, to coordinate with utilities. And so that's something that these comprehensive towns do, is they have water utilities and wastewater utilities. And when you have a long-term plan, you can coordinate improvements in the utilities. Like, when you're putting in new lines, you coordinate that with the road and or the sidewalk, and you can have two sources of revenue for that project, which is really, really important. So just thanks for all you do, Dan, and I'm glad we're going to have you here again.
Thank you.
Well, here's what I'm just trying to understand: the whole for Brattleboro that is being created. I think you said you're putting $500,000 a year into an operating budget to work on capital projects, and you really should be putting 800.
850. Yeah.
How do I, if I was going to describe the 18 million that you talk about, knowing that you're not gonna, it can't be the goal to have every single road up to 100% all at one time. How would you describe the 18 million?
How would I describe?
Yeah, how would you just?
That'd be a dream. I think.
Yes, well, that would have everything at 100%. What's the goal in Brattleboro based upon the 800,000?
So the 800,000. So I think if you flip to page 4 in that report, there's a forecasting page that kind of shows it really well. The 800, they actually show it as 880,000 on theirs. The black line that goes through the middle, that just pretty much maintains the condition that we have now. So, if the taxpayers desired to improve road conditions, we'd have to invest more than that annually. And you can see what, a $1.2 million investment would look like over the course of 5 years would bring that score up, and then again, even more at $1.5 million. So
Okay.
I think my ultimate goal is not to let anything get any worse, but at current funding levels, that's not realistic. So it's really targeting the areas that we can maintain what we have that is in good condition and keep it there.
Okay, so the 18 maintains you at your RSR level of roughly 64%.
Right, the 880, yeah.
Yeah. We'll get a chance to take a look at this, and we will want you back. And what I would say to the league is, if you can produce other communities that have done similar work, that would be helpful.
If I said, it's like, is it as simple as like the RSR scale that you're using is maybe transferable to the agencies as like, the same kind of 4 groups? It's very poor would be like 25 and below, and poor would be 25 to 50. Is that like a reasonable?
Pretty similar, yes.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff we would want to understand when you came back is, what does that scoring really mean? What's that? So at this point, thank you, Dan, very much. And we are going to move on to public transit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks.
Caleb? Can't stand the sun.
Oh, I'll tell you what, it's hot right here.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Senators, for having me today. My name is Caleb Grant from Rural Community Transportation, joining you today as the chair of the Vermont Public Transportation Association. So public transportation is not optional or ancillary. It's a core economic infrastructure comparable to roads, bridges, Broadway, and utilities. The economic theory is clear. Transportation produces positive externalities that private markets alone cannot capture. Employers gain access to labor, workers gain access to jobs, healthcare, and education, and communities retain population and tax base. When transportation systems are stable, Vermont's economy functions. When they are not, economic decline accelerates. Any good farmer, logger, or bike mechanic knows, as a machine ages and there's question of its functional ability, the last thing you neglect is the grease, the element that smooths out the wearing edges, and the humble element that, when ignored, leads to catastrophic failure. Public transportation appropriations in recent years have been, in one word, variable. We are appreciative of the support that VTrans has provided, particularly given the funding pressures across all modes and sectors. However, year over year, increases can be misleading. Some apparent growth is driven by one-time federal infusions, such as carbon reduction funds or competitive award grants. These dollars are helpful, but not structural, and cannot sustain operations. State matches for operations. This is the most important category for transit providers, is the state match. The true bread and butter of funding. The funding supports administration, personnel, route operations and scheduling, maintenance, insurance, and fuel and utilities, and most critically is also in the category used to meet local match for federal grants. Over the last 3 fiscal years, the state match has been largely level funded. In earlier years, the state match has artificially low because COVID funds were used to supplement it.
While these recent figures show modest increases, they remain well below what is required to operate transit systems sustainably. Transportation underfunding creates what is a self-reinforcing failure cycle. Unlike many of the other projects like roads, bridges, transportation is largely scalable, but that scale does have guardrails. The bottom rail being that self-reinforcing failure. Insufficient operating funds reduces service instability. Service instability leads to ridership loss. Ridership loss leads to rider per rider cost, and higher costs then creates service cuts or provider insolvency. We've seen this in the Northeast across regional providers becoming insolvent, and this is not theoretical. It is happening now in Vermont. The state legislature directed public transit non-federal match study projected a 3.7 million statewide operating deficit in fiscal year 27. This estimate includes needed capital investments for vehicles and facilities, and that forecast is proving accurate. The real world impacts to our providers. One provider faces an estimated 315,000 deficit in fiscal year 26, prompting administrative position cuts, reducing night coverage, and reducing holiday schedules for riders. Service reductions leading to lower frequency or multiple routes, and the elimination of service on certain days. The estimated ridership impact for this one provider is 80,000 lost rides. Another provider absorbed deficits totaling $380,000 over the past 2 fiscal years, resulting in route reductions, administrative cuts, and inability to hire for essential operations. Insurance costs alone for providers across the system have increased by approximately $1 million with no additional coverage. That is just baseline, our umbrella coverage, our vehicle coverage, and our operational coverage. We're also facing a significant risk in capital investment. Vermont's transit fleet is aging, and without sustained capital funding, we're losing vehicles faster than we can replace them. One provider reports a 33% of its fleet, or 20 buses, is past useful life. A spare ratio of 8% compared to the FTA recommended 15%. To stretch limited dollars, providers have purchased used buses, which increases maintenance costs and reduces reliability. Maintenance staffing is insufficient due to lack of operating funds. Facility needs are also being deferred. A needed facility in Brattleboro to safely store and wash buses has been delayed, and vehicles are now exposed to vandalism and weather damage. Uncertainty around federal capital funding further compounds these risks. Human services and transportation pressures. Demand for transportation tied to human services is increasingly rapid. Older adults and persons with disability program funds are being depleted earlier in the fiscal year due to high demand. We're seeing significant increases in dialysis needs and other critical cares, and providers have begun to restrict new members and rides allocations to specific members. This directly impacts the access to healthcare and essential services, nutritional access, and quality of life. While outside the transportation fund, non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, funding is critical and inadequate. VPTA lost $800,000 in fiscal year 2025, and I will note there is no direct address of that loss in the DEVA Budget Adjustment Act, and an additional $500,000 loss occurred in Q1 of fiscal year 26. These losses threaten provider stability and inevitably affect broader transit service. We are hopeful that DEVA and the legislature will address these deficits in fiscal year 26 BAA, because without action, providers will have no choice but to seek legislative relief. Economies of scale, why a stable investment saves money. Transportation systems become more efficient at scale. shared maintenance and facilities, coordinated service planning, workforce stability, and centralized procurement. Predictable and sustained funding allows longer vehicle lifespans, lower per mile and per rider costs, and more efficient deployment of limited resources. In Vermont's rural context, unstable funding prevents these efficiencies, driving costs higher over time. The potential of transportation holds for acting as a flywheel, endless opportunity to gain efficiencies of scale and critical support for efforts across the state. It is really a choice for Vermont's future. Transportation is an investment and is a decision about workforce participation, business viability, healthcare access, and rural community survival. Failing to invest does not save money. It defers and multiplies costs, and strategic sustained investment in public transportation is one of the most cost-effective economic development tools available to all of you. This session, you'll experience a parade of exceptional people doing incredible work across the state with one common theme. They are hurting for money, and they do work in the work they do across the state: healthcare, education, childcare, economic development. It will be a lot, and I don't envy your position. I will ask you one thing though. As you go through these discussions, ask how dependent they are on public transportation. I think you'll find that a recurring theme, and one that I find in my community conversations as well, is that many of these industries are heavily dependent on public transportation investment. And so the question before us is not whether Vermont can afford to invest in transportation, but whether it can afford not to. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's good.
It would be helpful if you anecdotally gave the couple of transit providers, one that's 300 plus in the whole one that over the last 2 years lost it. It would be helpful if we had a fuller picture of what the full picture was across the state.
I'm happy to provide a comprehensive analysis of what the losses look like. It is difficult to kind of analyze the losses because, again, it is scalable. For instance, RCT went into the grant cycle. You apply for, both program development, but both program sustainability. And based off of our award, we adjust our services. So an application to grow microtransit services, what is level funded with increasing costs, then leads to a reduction of 5 hours of service per day. That then leads to a potential decrease of up to 10% of ridership within that microtransit service area. So did we experience a loss in that case? No, we scaled to the appropriate budget. Who experienced the loss? The riders. So quantifying that as a constantly fluctuating, we have a number of levers that we can pull. I think the most constrained services are certainly the fixed route. You send the bus on the route and it meets its stops in appropriate deadlines, and there's very few things you could do other than reducing vehicle size, which has incremental decreases. But the other alternative is to cut routes, which is one of the examples shared by that $300,000 deficit. So I think it's hard to truly reflect the comprehensive losses experience because going into each service cycle, we adjust appropriate to the funds that are given. So
everybody makes assumptions.
I appreciate that.
And if you start from an assumption that we're trying to create a steady state, if you had a steady state, then you could come back with us, and we're going to ask you again early in the session to produce a steady state of ridership. What would that look like? That would be helpful.
And just to clarify for me, I would kind of present that the providers over the past 2 years have been doing efficient cuts to get us to what is minimally sustainable. And at that point, any further cuts are going to be into what are measurably successful units. So I would say at this point, we're as sugared off as we can get. So to come forward with that rate, are you looking for an optimal service or for where we currently stand?
I think a lot of people make assumptions about, Brattleboro just came in and they said, we maintain the system the way we are. Here's what we would have to do if we increased it to this level. We can't do that for you.
Okay.
And, I'm not in a position to be able to tell you what your providers and what their budgets are. We have to rely on you to be able to articulate to us so we can articulate to our colleagues what is going on. So I would ask that you take and at least make a stab at it and to explain to us what the flaws are and what you do, but without, apparently at least one agency came up with a number.
Mm-hmm.
And so a like number from all of the agencies, I think is would be important.
Thank you, Chairman Westman. I'm happy to provide that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? At this, then we thank everybody for coming. We're going to. Is there a way to keep Wendy online?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and we're generally going to go offline, and I would like the members of the committee to